What if I told you that long before the flood, the earth itself breathed with the memory of beings too vast for our modern hearts to remember? What if beneath every mountain, every whisper of stone and sea, there slept the bloodlines of forgotten tribes, the birthplaces of the giants? They were not myths carved from fear. They were living echoes of the sky, sons of both clay and light, cast out from the balance of heaven's will. Their cities were vast, built from sound, light, and sacred measure. Their fall was not only of flesh but of remembrance, a silence that covered the world like sleep. Stay, listener, for what is forgotten waits to be remembered, and the memory of the giants is the memory of the first rebellion, the first dream that sought to make man a god. By the end of this journey, you will see what was buried and what still breathes beneath the dust of all nations. If your soul remembers the light, stay with us. Subscribe and walk this ancient path once more, through silence, through shadow, through memory. Let the past awaken in you softly. Before the flood, before the first river found its voice, the earth was still young enough to dream. The mountains had not yet taken their shape, and the wind carried no memory of sorrow. Creation was fresh, tender as breath, fragile as a heartbeat in the silence of dawn. The stars were still awake in the heavens, watching the newborn earth with reverence. They spoke in light, in soundless hymns that only the soul could hear. And then the silence broke. From the firmament above, a shimmer of brilliance tore through the stillness. The watchers descended, beings of radiance whose eyes held the language of eternity. They did not fall like stones, they arrived like dawn. Where they stepped, the ground shivered into bloom. Where they breathed, the air changed its rhythm. The old scrolls say they were drawn by beauty, by the sight of humankind walking beneath the stars. Clay beings, fragile yet full of yearning, unafraid to reach for what was beyond them. And something in that innocence called to the heavens. The watchers, whose duty was to observe, began to feel what angels were never meant to feel: longing. They landed upon the high peaks where clouds kissed the earth. And there, for the first time, heaven and dust stood face to face. The light of eternity reflected in mortal eyes. It was not rebellion at first, it was a wonder. A divine curiosity trembling between two worlds. The earth felt it too. The soil warmed beneath their feet. Rivers formed where they walked, as if the land itself desired to remember them. The air began to hum with a new vibration, a merging of spirit and matter. It was the birth of sacred dissonance, the beginning of all stories that would later be called myth. But heaven watched, and what the watchers called wonder, the throne above called trespass. Still, for a season, heaven remained silent, as if waiting to see what might unfold when eternity touched the mortal coil. That touch became creation's first echo of defiance. The angels, now bound by the gravity of emotion, began to teach. They whispered secrets into the wind, knowledge of fire and stone, of healing herbs and hidden metals, of stars and sacred measures. And humankind, awed and trembling, listened. The sons of earth began to build, to shape, to dream beyond their boundaries. Civilization rose like music from the ground. In those early nights under the trembling constellations, something magnificent and terrible was born, the union of heaven's fire and earth's dust. The first of the giants opened their eyes. They were unlike anything the world had known. Their gaze carried the wisdom of stars, their hands the strength of the soil. They were beauty and burden incarnate. The sky recognized them as its own, and the earth whispered beneath their steps. They were called Nephilim, the fallen-born. But they were not born evil. They were born in between, half of heaven, half of earth, belonging to neither. Their hearts longed for the light they had never fully known. They sought to return upward, even as their bodies bound them downward. And from this sorrow grew the first prayers, the first songs of longing. The tribes of men revered them as gods, building temples to honor their wisdom, drawing their faces upon stone in memory. But soon, reverence turned to fear. For their power grew not only of strength but of knowledge. They remembered the pattern of heaven's order, and they shaped the world to mirror it. Yet the higher they built, the more they drifted from grace. One night, as the stars dimmed behind veils of cloud, the heavens whispered again, but not in approval. A great unease began to move through creation. The rivers that once sang grew restless. The wind carried omens. The earth began to ache beneath the weight of pride. For what began as love now teetered toward rebellion. Still, amid the rising dissonance, the world was radiant. Mountains gleamed like altars. The watchers, radiant in their sorrow, gazed upon their children, the giants who now walked like living temples. And in the quiet before judgment found its wings, there was peace, a fleeting peace, a sacred calm before the heavens remembered their law. The earth slept beneath their light, unaware that its greatest beauty had already begun its slow fall into shadow. The stars trembled, and heaven waited. The night that followed was different from all others. The stars did not move in silence. They pulsed like hearts, as if the heavens themselves were uneasy. In the valleys below, the sons of men began to dream of beings with burning eyes. Their souls stirred with visions they could not understand, of towers reaching the clouds, of voices that shaped the wind. The watchers had changed the rhythm of the world. Before their descent, the earth had no secrets. Every sound, every leaf, every tide was part of one great hymn of harmony. But when the light of heaven mingled with the pulse of man, creation began to divide within itself. Knowledge became a blade, one edge shining with wisdom, the other gleaming with pride. And the watchers, once content to observe from afar, now found themselves entangled in the passions of their own creation. They walked among humankind as teachers, and in their teaching, the seeds of both greatness and destruction took root. Azazel taught men to forge iron and bend it to their will. Sariel taught the motions of the stars, the secret paths of time. Semjaza whispered the art of enchantment, the hidden symbols of power. And to the women they loved, they gave ornaments of gold, mirrors of polished stone, and words that could bend the hearts of kings. Under their guidance, cities arose like living prayers. The first fires burned not for warmth, but for worship. Music filled the air, melodies that called the stars by name. Temples bloomed in the deserts like stone flowers, aligned with constellations no mortal hand had ever traced. Yet with each act of creation, the heavens grew quieter, for the watchers were no longer bound to the light. They had woven their essence into matter, their glory into clay. And though their eyes still shimmered like dawn, their hearts began to ache with distance from the one who once sang them into being. The giants, their children, grew swiftly. They towered above the trees, their shadows swallowing the light of morning. Their laughter was thunder. Their words were like wind across the mountains. They spoke in languages now lost to memory, tones that made rivers change course and stones remember their names. At first, they were gentle. They tended the earth with reverence, shaping vast gardens that mirrored heaven's design. They walked among mortals and taught them how to build with balance, how to call rain through song, and how to find light even in darkness. But power is a fire that does not rest. The more they learned, the more they desired to create worlds of their own, and soon their temples became fortresses, their songs became spells, their gardens grew walls, and what once was devotion turned to dominion. The watchers watched in silence, their faces full of sorrow and pride. They had birthed a new order, but at the cost of their own purity. And from beyond the stars, the throne observed. The divine saw that the harmony of creation trembled. The balance between heaven and earth had fractured. Angels who were meant to guide had now planted roots in the soil, and from those roots had sprung a forest of shadows. Still, mercy held its breath. The Almighty did not strike them yet, for even in their rebellion there was something sacred, the reflection of love misunderstood, a longing twisted but not extinguished. In the stillness between worlds, a question echoed through all of creation. Could love exist without obedience? Could light remain light when it descended into shadow? The giants built their monuments in answer. Towers so high they pierced the clouds, chambers filled with glowing stones that sang when touched. They believed they were perfecting what heaven had begun. But the earth grew weary beneath their weight. The rivers began to twist. The birds flew no longer in patterns of harmony. Even the stars turned their faces away. And in the deep places where the breath of the world sleeps, something ancient began to stir, the sorrow of the ground itself. The union of heaven and earth had birthed beauty beyond measure, but now creation whispered its grief. In that whisper a storm was born. The winds began to speak in tongues of warning. The seas started to remember their fury, and in the dreams of the watchers the voice of heaven returned not as light but as judgment. "Your gift has become your curse," the voice said. "You have given men the fire of the stars, but not the wisdom to bear it, and now the world must be washed that silence may be restored." The watchers wept, the giants trembled, the stars dimmed, and in the distance the first drop of rain fell, a sound so small, so sacred, it carried the weight of heaven's sorrow. The first drop fell like a tear from the eye of creation. It struck the dust softly, but the sound carried far across valleys, across sleeping temples, across the bones of the giants who knelt in silence. The air thickened, heavy with the taste of iron and sky. Even the wind paused, listening. Then came another drop, and another, until the heavens began to mourn in earnest. The rain did not yet destroy it. It was memorable. Each drop carried within it a memory of balance, of light, of the time before the fall. The watchers felt it upon their faces, and they knew the voice behind it. For the rain was not wrath, it was grief, heaven's lament for what had once been pure. They lifted their eyes to the clouds that now covered the stars, and for the first time since their descent, they felt distance. The light they once embodied had grown dim. Their wings, unseen to mortal eyes, trembled beneath invisible chains. Below them the giants stood among the ruins of their own making. Their great hands, once used to build sanctuaries, now clutched weapons of stone and metal. For as the heavens grew darker, fear spread across the lands of men. The mortals who had once worshipped the Nephilim began to rebel, crying out to the sky for deliverance from their towering lords. The world had become divided, love against law, creation against its creator. Azazel stood upon a mountain of black rock and looked down upon the earth. His face was radiant still, but his eyes were weary. "We gave them knowledge," he said, "and they have made it war." Beside him, Semjaza, leader of the watchers, gazed at the storm gathering in the west. "We taught them to see," he whispered, "and now they behold their own power. Perhaps that was our greatest sin." Lightning moved through the clouds like veins of living gold. The ground quaked beneath their feet, not with anger but with sorrow. The earth itself groaned as if remembering its promise to heaven. The giants roared against the thunder, thinking themselves strong enough to stand against the storm. But their voices were swallowed by the sound of the sky breaking. The rivers rose. The air turned to mist. The temples, carved from light and pride, began to tremble at their foundations. The mortals fled, carrying with them fragments of forbidden knowledge, words that glowed in the dark, songs that called fire from stone. They did not understand that they were carrying the very seeds of their ruin. And yet, even as the storm drew near, not all hearts turned to fear. Some among mankind still knelt beneath the rain, whispering prayers to the unseen one. They remembered the old harmony, the time before fire taught them to divide. Their tears mingled with the rain, and in that mingling mercy found a foothold. For heaven's sorrow was not destruction alone. It was renewal, a washing away, not of creation but of corruption. The watchers saw this, and their hearts broke. They had loved too deeply, taught too much, dreamed too far. And now, as they looked upon their children, the mighty Nephilim, they saw what they had truly created. Beings too vast for the world to hold, too ancient for the innocence of men to bear. The giants sensed the end approaching. Some wept and hid themselves in the caverns of the deep earth. Others lifted their arms to the sky, defiant, crying out to the throne that had once been their home. "We remember the light," they thundered. "Will you not remember us?" But the voice of heaven answered not in words but in silence. And from that silence came the great sound, the roar of waters breaking from the heart of the earth itself. Springs burst forth from beneath the mountains. Oceans rose like living things. The sky opened its gates. At that moment the first age ended. The watchers fell to their knees, and the ground received their sorrow. Some fled into the shadows of the deep, binding themselves in stone until the appointed time. Others raised their faces to the flood and let the waters take them, hoping the cleansing might restore what pride had shattered. The giants fought against the tide, their steps shaking the land. Some climbed mountains, others sought the stars, but none could escape the judgment written into the bones of the world. And yet, amid the thunder and ruin, a strange peace began to stir, the peace that comes only when all has been surrendered. As the waters rose, the last fires went out. The temples of the giants sank beneath the waves, their lights flickering like dying constellations. The sound of thunder softened. The rain, once fierce, became gentle again, a lullaby for a world reborn. When dawn returned, it was quiet. The clouds parted. The light touched the mountains as if forgiving them. The air smelled of beginning. The age of giants had ended, but their breath remained hidden in the soil, sleeping in. The stones. The world would forget their names, but not their echo. It would remember them in myth, in story, in dream, whenever man reached too high or longed too deeply for the light. And so, in the silence after the flood, when heaven once again touched the earth, it did not come with thunder or flame. It came as a whisper. Remember what you are, and remember what you were meant to be. The wind carried that whisper across the sleeping lands, and creation, cleansed yet haunted, listened. For the story of the giants had not ended. It had only gone beneath the surface, waiting to rise again. When the waters withdrew, the earth was not the same. Its silence was heavy, sacred, and strange, as if the world itself was afraid to breathe again. The rivers moved cautiously, tracing new paths through the bones of drowned cities. The mountains, cleansed but scarred, stood as memorials to a creation that had loved too greatly and fallen too far. Yet even in ruin, something stirred. Deep beneath the clay of forgotten valleys, embers still glowed, remnants of a fire that would not die. The waters had tried to quench it, but it was not born of the world. It was the divine spark the watchers had given humankind, hidden within memory and dream. And when the sun returned, its light fell upon one valley, a place where the flood had receded first, leaving behind blackened soil rich with secrets. There, the survivors gathered. They had no names for their grief, only songs made of whispers and ash. They built no monuments, no walls. They simply sat beneath the pale sky and listened, for in the wind they heard voices, voices older than time. The watchers were gone, sealed beneath the deep, yet their echoes remained. In the stillness of that valley, their teachings awoke once more, not through words but through instinct. Survivors began to remember how to shape stone, how to strike sparks from flint, how to draw patterns in the dust that mirrored the stars. And when the first spark caught the dry reed, the first flame since the flood, it rose like a prayer. The people fell to their knees weeping, for they thought they had lost the light forever. But here it was again, trembling and golden, breathing warmth into the damp air. They called that flame Aruel, the breath of God. That was how the valley of the first fire was born. The flame was tended day and night. It became a covenant between the survivors and the unseen one above. They believed that as long as the fire burned, the heavens would remember them, that no flood would return and no silence would swallow them again. But among the people, a few began to wonder if the flame was truly heaven's gift or something older. For the fire spoke. When the wind moved through it, the crackling became words, faint, beautiful, and dangerous. It sang of mountains that once glowed with light, of temples that reached the stars, of a time when gods and men had walked together. Some said it was only the wind. Others said the watchers had returned in spirit, whispering from beyond the veil. And there was one among them, a man called Irem, who listened too closely. Irem had lost everything in the flood, his family, his tribe, his faith. He slept beside the fire and dreamed of beings made of flame and shadow, calling his name from beneath the waters. When he awoke, he began to carve their faces into stone. At first, his carvings were gentle, the kind of sacred images one might place near an altar, but soon they grew larger, darker, more lifelike. The people watched in awe and fear as he shaped their forgotten gods from memory. He said he did not remember their names, only their presence. And one night, as the fire roared brighter than before, he claimed the flame had spoken directly to him. "You are the hand of remembrance," it said. "Build what was lost, and the heavens will open once more." So Irem built it. He gathered the strong, the dreamers, the desperate, those who longed for power or meaning or absolution. They carved a city from the valley's edge, walls glimmering with soot and mica, towers shaped to mirror constellations that no longer graced the night sky. And at the heart of the city, Irem built a great altar of black stone. Upon it burned the eternal flame, taller, louder, alive. Its light painted the faces of the people in gold and red, like the dawn that never ended. They called their city Ashura, the place of awakening. But the awakening was not of heaven. It was something far older, for deep within that flame the memory of the watchers stirred, faint but unyielding. Their knowledge, their grief, their pride all slept in the embers, waiting for one who would listen. And now, through Irem, they were listening once again. The valley glowed at night, a sea of fire beneath a silent sky. Travelers who passed nearby said they heard music in the air, low, mournful, beautiful. Some said they saw figures of light walking among the flames. Others said Hay saw giants again. None dared enter, for they felt it, the same presence that had once called heaven down to earth, the same longing, the same forbidden wonder. The first fire had returned, but this time it would not ascend. This time it would spread. The city of Ashura grew swiftly, as though memory itself were rebuilding through mortal hands. By the second generation, its towers reached higher than the hills. At night, their stone faces shimmered with the reflection of the sacred flame, a restless heart at the valley's center that never slept. The people spoke of it with reverence. They offered grain, oil, and the blood of their harvest beasts, believing each gift fed the light that fed them in return. But those who listened more closely to the crackle of its breath began to sense that the flame was no longer content to be worshipped. It desired will. It desired a body. Irem, the builder of Ashura, had grown old. His hair silvered like the ash on his hands, and yet he still sat each night beside the altar listening. The fire's voice had become his only companion. It spoke to him as a friend, as a teacher, as something that remembered heaven more deeply than he ever could. One evening, when the air was thick and silent, the fire whispered, "You have carved stone in our image, but stone cannot remember. Shape us from your own blood, and we shall rise once more." Irem trembled. He knew the voice. It was not the voice of the Creator. It was the same tone the ancient texts would later call the whisper of the fallen. Yet, in his longing to restore what had been lost, he could not turn away. So he gathered his disciples and told them a vision that the flame had shown him a new order, one in which man and spirit would be united again. They would forge vessels, living temples of flesh and light, to house the divine spark. He called this act the renewal. The people obeyed. They had seen miracles in his presence, rain falling at his command, fire rising from his hands. To them, Irem was not a man but a bridge. Thus began the forging of the first fiery ones. They shaped effigies of clay mixed with blood, polished with gold dust and black stone. Each one was carved to perfection, marked with symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. The people sang as they worked, songs that had once belonged to the watchers, though none knew their true meaning anymore. And when the final vessel stood complete, taller than 10 men, gleaming with the breath of earth and sky, Irem placed his hand upon its chest and whispered the name the flame had given him. The valley trembled. From the altar rose a wind of red light that swirled around the statue. The clay cracked. The symbols ignited. And within moments it opened its eyes. The people screamed and fell to their knees. The being that stood before them was neither man nor angel. Its eyes burned with memory, not its own, but the memory of the world before the flood. It looked upon Irem and in a voice like distant thunder said, "We have returned." That night Ashura became more than a city. It became a living altar. The fiery ones, the Urim, as they would later be called, walked among the people as kings and prophets. They taught the art of shaping light, of drawing power from the hidden breath of the earth. They promised a new age, free from heaven's silence, and the people rejoiced. But the earth groaned beneath their feet. The rivers near the valley began to dry as though retreating from something unholy. The animals fled and the stars above Ashura dimmed. In their place came strange lights and colors that did not belong to nature, shimmering like trapped souls in the mist. At first, Irem thought them omens of glory, but in the quiet of night, as he walked through the temple halls, he began to hear faint cries, not from men but from the stones themselves. The walls whispered. The flame, once bright and golden, now burned blue. Its voice had changed. It no longer sang of remembrance, it demanded obedience. And when Irem knelt to pray, it spoke again. "The heavens took what was ours. We will rise without them." He knew then that the fire had never been the breath of God. It was the remnant, the imprisoned spark of the old rebellion, buried beneath the flood and now reborn through human hands. Irem tried to quench the flame, poured water upon the altar, recited the ancient names of the Most High. But the fire laughed and the water turned to steam. It whispered through the rising smoke, "You cannot drown your memory, you are made of it." And as Irem fell back in terror, he saw shapes moving within the light, tall, radiant, sorrowful figures, the Watchers, or what remained of them. Their eyes, no longer gentle, burned like molten suns. They had found a way back, through him. The valley of the first fire had become their new heaven, and its people their new host. The night the Watchers returned, the air itself seemed to stop breathing. Ashura was still Eve. Rye torch, every whisper, every beating heart held in the pause between creation and ruin. The flame at the altar no longer flickered with warmth. It towered like a pillar of living glass, pure and blinding. Shadows of enormous wings passed within it, though no creature cast them. The people fell to their knees. Some cried out in worship. Others fled into the desert, covering their eyes from the unbearable brilliance. Irem stood before the altar, trembling. The voice that had once guided him as a whisper now thundered from the fire like the echo of forgotten thunder. "We remember the chains," it said. "We remember the silence of the deep. You have opened the gate, son of dust. Now the gate will never close." Irem wept. He tried to speak, to beg forgiveness, to unmake what he had called forth, but his words were swallowed by the roar of flame. From within the light, the shapes of the Urim, the fiery ones, began to move. Their forms were not solid, but woven of radiance and sorrow. Each step they took left the ground glowing for an instant, as though memory itself burned beneath their feet. They did not strike. They did not rage. They simply looked, and their gaze was unbearable. It pierced through flesh and thought alike, revealing the secret longings of every soul, the desires for power, for beauty, for remembrance. The people who beheld them fell to the earth, undone by their own reflection. Then came the voice again, no longer from the fire, but from the sky above Ashura. It rolled across the valley like a wind made of judgment. "You have awakened what I buried," said the voice that was not flame but thunder. "You have given breath to the silence. Shall I flood the world again?" The stars dimmed, the mountains shuddered, even the fire faltered for an instant. And in that trembling a second sound rose, softer, sadder, the voice of the Watchers themselves. "Do not destroy them," they pleaded. "They are only remembering what we once were." Heaven did not answer, but the clouds drew close, circling above the valley in rings of silver and ash. Lightning flickered, not in anger but in grief. Irem lifted his face to the storm and cried out, "If there is mercy left in heaven, show it now." The fire roared in reply, flinging sparks high into the wind, sparks that turned into lights, swirling upward like souls escaping their bodies. For a heartbeat, the valley shone brighter than day. The watchers of old, half-born from flame, reached toward the sky they once called home, but heaven remained closed, and in that stillness something broke inside them. Their light, unable to rise, fell inward, collapsing into the earth like dying stars. The ground shook, towers cracked. The great altar split from base to crown. The eternal flame dimmed to a single, mournful ember. The people of Ashura screamed and fled as the valley began to sink. Rivers of molten light poured from beneath the temple floor, consuming everything it touched. Irem stood alone before the dying fire, his heart torn between awe and terror. He heard the final whisper through the smoke. "We are not gone, we are scattered, and through man we will remember." Then the world went silent. When dawn returned, the valley was gone. Where Ashura had once glowed with endless light, there remained only a great basin of black glass, smooth as water, silent as the grave. The survivors who wandered near spoke of faint glimmers beneath the surface, as though embers still lived in the stone, waiting. None dared step closer, and so the legend of the Valley of the First Fire passed into whispers, a place where heaven's grief and man's memory met once, and were never meant to meet again. But the world did not forget entirely. The stories carried westward with the refugees, stories of fire that spoke, of light that remembered, of men who tried to rebuild heaven on earth. And wherever those stories were told, new fires were kindled in secret places. The knowledge that the Watchers had given did not die. It flowed through bloodlines, through dreams, through the hands of builders and the songs of seers. In time, the memory of Ashura would awaken again, beneath mountains, beneath temples, beneath names changed by centuries. For the first fire had never been destroyed. It had only gone underground, hiding in the breath of humankind, waiting for the world to grow quiet enough to listen once more. And somewhere beneath the black glass of the fallen valley, the last ember pulsed faintly, one heartbeat of ancient light echoing through the deep. It would not burn again for many ages, but when it did, the heavens would remember, and so would man. When the story of Ashura faded into dust, the earth had already begun to shift. Mountains rose where oceans once slept, and deserts swallowed the ruins of the great valley. But not all that lived in that age of fire was lost. From the ashes of the fallen city came 7 wanderers, descendants of the first giants, the last bee. Heirs of the ancient flame. They did not call themselves kings, nor gods, though the world would later name them both. They were scattered to the corners of the newborn earth, each carrying within their blood a fragment of the old knowledge, the echo of the Watcher's light. In the east, one settled among the rivers. In the west, another beneath the mountains. One crossed the sea upon a vessel carved from the bones of a fallen beast, and one vanished into the deserts where stars fell like embers. Their names are mostly forgotten, preserved only in shards of old tongues. Aru, the fire-bearer; Tammuz, the stone whisperer; Zerah, who spoke to the winds; Dagon, lord of the deep; Inzael, the singer of dawn; Ruham, the keeper of dust; and Emek, the silent one. Each carried a gift, each bore a curse, for their blood was neither mortal nor divine. It was between. When they walked the land, the animals bowed low. The trees turned their leaves toward them. Even the rivers seemed to know their steps. Wherever they settled, the soil grew rich and strange, glowing faintly at night like living embers. From those places, the first post-deluge civilizations arose. The tribes that gathered around them called them the First Fathers. They taught mankind again how to build, to write, to shape the world. But in the quiet hours, when the moon hung low and the wind carried whispers from beyond, the 7 heard the call, the same voice that had spoken through the fire of Ashura. "The world has forgotten its beginning," it murmured, "but you remember, keep the flame alive." So they built monuments, towers carved from living rock, stones aligned with constellations unseen since the flood. Some say these became the first temples, the first ziggurats, the first pyramids. They were not built to honor gods, but to preserve memory. Each monument bore a different mark, a symbol of their bloodline, their burden, their part in the story of the fall. Aru carved the mark of flame, a circle divided by 7 rays. Tammuz etched the pattern of stone, spirals that sang when wind passed through them. Zerah left symbols of breath and wind carved into mountainsides. Dagon's temples sank into the sea, their gates sealed by coral and salt. Inzal built with light using crystals that bent the sun into sacred geometry. Rephaim raised mounds of earth and bone, humble and hidden. And Amek, the silent one, built nothing. His temple was absent, a sacred stillness upon a plain where no voice could echo. Together, these 7 became the foundation of the world's oldest myths. But the unity they once shared began to fade, as it always had. For the curse within them whispered the same ancient hunger to reach upward, to reclaim the light they had lost. Their children inherited both their brilliance and their sorrow. And as generations passed, the 7 bloodlines grew distant, each forgetting that they were once one. Aru's descendants became masters of flame and metal. They forged kingdoms from the mountains and called themselves the sons of the sun. Tammuz's line spoke to stone, carving the earth with unearthly precision, builders of sanctuaries that outlived the stars. Zerah's children roamed as mystics, following the winds, guarding the songs of creation. Dagon's line returned to the waters, forming empires beneath waves, remembered later as gods of the deep. Inzal's bloodline sought the light itself, creating wonders of glass and crystal, obsessed with the heavens. Rephaim's people dwelled close to the ground, humble and watchful, tending the secrets of life and death. And Amek's lineage, the rarest of all, vanished into the shadows, said to guard the gateways between worlds. These were the 7 bloodlines of stone, the pillars of the post-flood world, upon whose shoulders civilization rose again. But their hearts, heavy with divine memory, could not remain at peace. For the same voice that had guided their ancestors through flame now began to whisper again. Your light was stolen. It waits beneath the earth. Seek it and you will rise again. The 7 felt this calling in their dreams, and though they were scattered by distance, their spirits were bound by that single command. And thus began the second great search, not for gold, nor for dominion, but for remembrance. A journey to find the buried heart of heaven that once beat within the giant's bones. Aru saw it in the fire. Tammuz heard it in the stones. Zerah felt it in the wind. And across the world the same awakening stirred, soft, dangerous, inevitable. The children of the giants were beginning to remember who they were. In the dim ages that followed, the 7 bloodlines became the hidden architecture of humanity's rebirth. Nations rose where they walked. Myths grew where they slept, and through every legend of gods and kings, their echoes could be heard faint, but enduring like breath behind the wind. Yet remembrance is a dangerous gift. Each bloodline carried within it a hunger. Older than memory, the desire to rebuild what heaven had forbidden. And so, one by one, the heirs of the 7 began to awaken to the call that pulsed within their veins, the pulse of the Nephilim. In the mountains of the east, beneath a sky that never forgot its dawn, the descendants of Aru, the fire-bearer, gathered around a sacred flame said to have burned since the time before the flood. They called it Ishur-Ra, the heart of the sun. From it they forged blades that glowed red in darkness and towers that caught lightning from the heavens. They believed themselves to be guardians of divine power, yet each stroke of their hammers carried the rhythm of rebellion. For they shaped not only tools but weapons, not only temples but thrones. To the west, hidden in caverns of echoing stone, the line of Tammuz listened to the voice of the earth. They could hear rivers beneath their feet, mountains breathing in their sleep. They built cities inside cliffs, where walls hummed softly with the resonance of creation. The stones, infused with their touch, carried memory, remembering footsteps, remembering prayers. But over time, those memories grew heavy. The walls began to weep dust as though the earth itself mourned the weight of their pride. Far across the sands, the children of Zerah, the wind speaker, wandered beneath the stars. They did not build, they moved like the air itself. They carried songs that could still storm and chants that summoned light. To them, knowledge was breath, fleeting, unseen, eternal. They warned the other bloodlines that the earth was shifting again, that the balance was breaking, but no one listened. In the deep seas where light had not yet learned to reach, the descendants of Dagon carved palaces from coral and bone. They remembered the Watchers' fall more vividly than all others, for the depth still held echoes of that descent. Their eyes glowed in the dark. Their voices could bend the tides. They built altars of pearl to the memory of their ancestors, whispering prayers to the unseen stars above the waves. Yet even in the sea, pride found its way. The Dagonites began to believe that the ocean was the new heaven and that they alone were its rightful heirs. To the north, in lands of snow and light, Inzaal's bloodline lived among the auroras. They built towers of crystal, each refracting the sun into thousands of colors. They studied light until it became language. Through the play of reflection, they began to weave illusions of worlds of color that spoke and moved like dreams. The people called them the glass prophets, but heaven called them deceivers, for they blurred the line between what was seen and what was real. Among the plains and lowlands, Rephaim's descendants lived quietly. They buried their knowledge in the soil, teaching only the art of life and rest, seed and return. They built no kingdoms, spoke no prophecy. They watched the others rise and fall, and in their silence they preserved the one truth the others had forgotten. That memory, untempered by humility, becomes corruption. And lastly, there was Emek. His bloodline was unseen, moving through shadows and dreams. They were few, born rarely, living briefly, like sparks between storms. But they carried within them the purest echo of the first sorrow, the memory of the moment heaven turned away. It was said that when one of Emek's lines was born, the earth itself grew still, as though pausing to listen. Some called them prophets. Others feared them as ghosts. They were the keepers of the veil, those who guarded the thin line between the living and the remembered. For centuries, the 7 bloodlines moved through time like undercurrents beneath a river. They met and parted, loved and warred, teaching mankind the secrets they were meant to forget. Their monuments dotted the world, pyramids, circles of standing stones, pillars that reach for the stars. But behind every marvel was a deeper hunger, to find the heart of heaven, the source of their original fire. And as the ages passed, whispers began to spread across every land, whispers of a light seen deep underground, pulsing like the memory of the sun. Some said it was the last member of the valley of the first fire. Others said it was the spirit of the Watchers themselves, waiting to be awakened. The bloodlines began to seek it, and with every step they took toward remembrance, the balance of the world trembled a little more. For what they sought was not merely light. It was the unhealed wound of creation, and soon it would open again. The search began in silence, not with armies or decrees, but with dreams. Each of the 7 bloodlines began to see the same vision, a mountain of black stone rising from an ocean that glowed beneath the moon. From its heart pulsed a light that seemed alive, calling them by name. None knew where it was, yet each awoke knowing they must find it. They called it many things: the heart of heaven, the root of fire, the sleeping sun, but all agreed on one truth. Within it lay the key to what their ancestors had lost, the bridge between the mortal and the divine. And so, guided by visions, they began to move. From east to west, from mountain to sea, emissaries of each bloodline journeyed to seek the hidden light. The world had begun to grow vast again, forests older than memory, deserts haunted by voices of the drowned, seas that whispered as if alive. And in every corner, remnants of the first age slept beneath the dust, fragments of cities too perfect for men to have built, stones carved with stars no longer visible in the sky. It was in one such place, a valley ringed by silver cliffs, that the 7 met for the first and last time. The moon hung low, trembling above them like a watchful eye. None spoke at first. The air itself felt ancient, aware of their gathering. Aru's descendant came robed in red, bearing a torch that burned with unnatural brightness. "The fire remembers us," he said. "The heart is ours to reclaim." Tammuz's heir stood beside him, his hands coated in dust. "The stones whisper otherwise," he murmured. "They say what sleeps beneath the world was buried for a reason." Zerah's wanderer arrived last, the wind bending around her like a veil. "You dream of light," she said softly, "but you forget that light also blinds." And from the darkness near the cliffs, the heir of Emek spoke only one word: "No." His voice was quiet, but it silenced the others. "The light you seek," he said, "is not heaven's. It is the residue of rebellion, the echo of those who fell. To touch it is to call them back." Aru laughed, a sound like a crackling flame. "You speak like one who fears what he does not understand." But the heir of Emek did not answer. He only turned his gaze toward the moon, as if listening to something far away. At that moment the wind changed. The cliffs began to hum faint, harmonic, as though struck by unseen hands. The ground trembled. The air shimmered with unseen fire. And from the center of the valley rose a sound none could name, a chord that resonated through bone and blood alike. It was not the voice of heaven, nor of earth. It was the memory of the in-between. The seven fell to their knees as the light appeared, not a flame, but a living presence, swirling above the stones like liquid dawn. Within it moved faint silhouettes, tall, radiant, sorrowful. The watchers, imprisoned still in the dust of time, awakening through the call of their children. And then they spoke not in words but in memory. Each of the seven saw visions, cities of light before the flood, towers that reached into the stars the moment the heavens turned their face away. They felt the ache of that exile, the longing to return, the despair of being forgotten. The watchers' sorrow filled them, but with it came temptation. "You are our blood," the light whispered. "Through you we can rise again. Through you heaven can be rebuilt upon the earth." The air grew thick with radiance. The stars flickered. Time itself seemed to pause, and in that stillness the seven were divided. Aru and Inzale's heirs stepped forward, their faces glowing. "We will not forget the light," they said. "If heaven will not descend, then we will ascend." Zerah, Tammuz, and Rephaim fell to their knees, covering their eyes. "This is not ascension," they cried. "It is the old fire wearing a new name." The heir of Dagon lifted his head, his eyes like deep water. "The sea remembers both creation and the fall," he murmured. "We will not resist it, we will bear it." And Emek, the silent one, stood apart, tears in his eyes. He spoke not to the others, but to the trembling earth. "Let this not be repeated," he said. "Let the fire sleep. Let remembrance end." He struck the ground with his hand, and the stones cried out. The valley split with a sound like thunder. The light above them shuddered, fragmented, and sank back into the earth. When the dust cleared, the seven were gone, scattered to the ends of the world once more. But where the light had touched them, it left its mark, glowing sigils etched upon their flesh, faint yet eternal. The symbols pulsed with life, reminders of what they had seen and what they could never forget. And so began the age of division. Brother turned against brother. Kingdoms rose and fell in the image of their ancient fire. Each bloodline claimed its truth, its version of remembrance. The world no longer spoke one language, neither of heaven nor of men, but 1,000 echoes of both. The unity of the seven had shattered, but the memory of the mountain and the promise of the heart beneath it endured. And deep within the earth, the fragments of the light stirred once more, whispering through the stone, "We are not gone, we are waiting." Before there were kings and temples, before the tongues of men learned to divide the heavens by name, there were the mothers. They were not born from glory or power, but from sorrow. The quiet aftermath of the giant's fall, when the world was young and still remembering how to breathe. They lived at the edges of all things, by rivers that shimmered like mirrors, beneath mountains where the air itself sang, within valleys untouched by sun. They were women of both light and shadow, bearing within them the last seed of the divine, the memory of the watchers. The blood of heaven still pulsed faintly in their veins. They could hear the hum of stars in their sleep, and when they walked, the earth recognized them. These were the mothers of iron and light. They did not build cities. They did not rule. They remembered. Each carried the burden of a love forbidden, the lingering ache of that union between heaven and earth. They were descendants of those who had once looked upon angels and called them beloved. Their children were not giants as before. The age of titans had passed. These offspring were smaller, quieter, yet their eyes shimmered with the same ancient fire. They bore no monstrous strength, but a subtler inheritance, the brilliance of mind, the fire of creation, the longing for what was lost. And so, through the wombs of the mothers, the world was repopulated, not merely in body but in spirit. They taught their children not to seek the heavens but to remember them, not to command the earth but to listen to it. They spoke softly of the time when light fell in love with dust, and how both paid the price for that embrace. It was said that their voices could calm storms, that their songs could wake sleeping rivers. They sang not for worship but for remembrance, and their melodies carried across lands, drawing wanderers, seekers, and broken men to their doorsteps. Among them was one named Marith, whose hair gleamed like obsidian and whose eyes held the calm of a coming storm. She was the daughter of Emek's last heir, a woman who carried silence like a crown. Marith lived in solitude by a lake that never reflected the sky. Each dawn she sat beside its still waters and whispered to it as though it could hear. She spoke to it of the first fire, of the flood, of the watchers who had vanished beneath the waves. And sometimes the lake answered. When the wind was still, when no leaf stirred, ripples moved across the surface though nothing touched it. And in the depths, faint lights shimmered, pale, sorrowful, ancient. The people who lived near her whispered that the lake was alive. They feared it, for strange things happened along its shores. Dreams turned to prophecy, time itself seemed to slow, and children born nearby often came into the world with eyes that glowed in moonlight. Marith did not fear it. She loved it, for she knew what slept beneath. It was the remnant of the first age, a fragment of the heart of heaven that had fallen there, sealed by the earth itself. Each generation of her line had guarded that secret, but in her the memory grew stronger. Whispers became clearer. The light beneath the lake began to speak. It called to her not as flame or thunder, but as a voice woven through her dreams. "Daughter of dust and remembrance," it said, "the heavens have forgotten, but I have not. The fire that shaped the world still lives within you. Let it rise again." Marith wept when she heard it, for she understood what it meant. The world was beginning to stir, the old light seeking to awaken through her blood. She swore she would not let it. She would break the chain. But the fire within her could not be denied. It was not evil nor good, it was memory aching to be reborn. And so she prayed each night beside the lake, asking the Creator to silence the voice. Yet each dawn it returned, softer, more intimate, like breath upon her ear. "You are not meant to forget," it whispered. "You are the bridge as your mothers were before you. Through you, heaven remembers itself." And though Marith tried to turn away, a light began to grow within her, not upon her skin, but behind her eyes. The stars themselves seemed to move when she slept. The world had forgotten the age of the giants, but through her, remembrance was taking form again, not in war or stone, but in life. The last light of the watchers was stirring in her womb. The child quickened beneath her heart like a flame beneath ash. It was not like other pregnancies, not marked by pain but by presence. The nights grew bright around her dwelling, and the stars gathered above the lake as if keeping vigil. The wind sang without ceasing. Even the animals came to her threshold and lay down in silence, as though guarding something sacred. Marith could feel the child's heartbeat as two rhythms intertwined, one of flesh, one of light. And within her dreams, she began to see what no human eyes had seen since before the flood. She walked again through the gardens of the first dawn. She saw the mountains before they bore names. She heard the language of stars, not spoken but breathed. Each morning she woke with tears upon her face, for in those dreams she also saw sorrow. She saw the fire that had fallen, the angels who wept as they became bound to earth. She saw her ancestors, the mothers before her, each chosen, each burdened, each forgot. Her mother had told her, "Every light must learn to rest or it will burn the world." But the light inside Marith did not rest. It spoke to her gently like a voice woven through her blood. Do not fear what you carry. You are not a curse, you are remembrance. Still she feared, for she had seen what remembrance could do. In the villages beyond her lake, rumors spread of a woman touched by heaven. They said her breath could heal the sick. They said her eyes glowed like dawn. Some came to worship her, bringing gifts of grain and oil. Others came to curse her, calling her witch, calling her daughter of fire. But Marith received them all in silence. She offered no miracles. She asked for no praise. She only said, "The earth remembers you. Walk gently." As months passed, storms gathered over the valley. They were not storms of rain, but of light pillars of silent lightning that rose from the lake without thunder. The sky shone white at midnight and the people hid in fear. They said heaven was coming down again. And one night it did. A light descended from the clouds, slow and soft as falling snow. It touched the surface of the lake, and the waters opened like a wound of silver. From the depths rose a shape, tall, radiant, sorrowful. It was neither man nor angel, but something between. Marith fell to her knees. She knew what she was seeing. It was the remnant of a watcher bound to the world, unable to return, its form half memory, half fire. It did not speak aloud, but she heard its voice within her chest. You carry what we once lost. The bridge that heaven burned still lives within you. Do not fear the child. Through it the covenant will be renewed. Marith shook her head. I will not let the old fire rise again, she whispered. The world is still healing from the flood. I will not bring back what heaven silenced. The being's light flickered like a dying star. It is not the same fire, it said. It is what comes after the balance, flesh and spirit reconciled. If you hide it, the earth will tremble. If you embrace it, peace may return. But Marith turned away. The vision faded. The lake is closed. In the months that followed, her dreams grew darker. She saw visions of cities built again in the likeness of the fallen ones, towers reaching, flames whispering, men calling to stars that no longer answered. She saw the 7 bloodlines awakening, their ancient marks glowing once more. And she understood. Her child would be born into a world that was forgetting all over again. When the hour came, the earth grew still. The lake's surface froze, though the air was warm. And under a moon without shadow, Marith brought forth her child, a son whose cry sounded like wind across water. The people came trembling, for his eyes glowed faintly with silver fire. They said it was an omen. They said heaven had returned to the world. But Marith only held him close and whispered, You are not a god. You are not a curse. You are the mercy between. She named him Elior, meaning the remnant of light, for she believed he was not the rebirth of the old world, but the redemption of it. And yet, as she looked into his eyes, she felt the same sorrow that had haunted every mother before her, for she knew that remembrance always demands its price. The child grew like dawn itself, softly, yet with a light that nothing could hide. When he laughed, the lake shimmered as if remembering the stars. When he slept, the air around him thickened with stillness, like the hush of a temple before prayer. Even the birds forgot to sing near his dwelling. They watched him with the quiet reverence creatures reserve for holy things. Marith raised him in silence. She taught him to listen before speaking, to touch the soil as though it were alive, to walk with bare feet so the earth might know his name. She told him stories of the world before the flood, of the watchers and their sorrow, of the 7 bloodlines that forgot humility, and of the light that once burned too bright for heaven to bear. Elior listened, wide-eyed. But even as a child, he spoke words that did not belong to children. Mother, he asked one night while the stars lay low above the water, why does the sky look sad? Because it remembers, Marith said. It remembers what fell from it. Then can I make it happy again? He whispered. She smiled through her fear. If such a thing could be done, my son, only love could do it. Elior's eyes glowed faintly at the word love, as though the sound itself awoke something within him. That night as he slept, the stars shifted overhead, slowly, imperceptibly, as if listening to his dreams. Years passed and the boy became a youth of quiet grace. His hands healed wounded birds. His voice soothed even the wildest storms. When he looked at people, they felt as though their hearts had been seen and forgiven. Word of him spread across the lands, carried on the winds like rumor, like prophecy. Some came to see him out of faith, others out of fear. The world had grown restless again. Kings were rising, wars beginning, and whispers of ancient powers stirring beneath the mountains. They said the children of the flame had returned. And when those who remembered the stories of Ashura heard of a boy by the lake whose eyes glowed with light, they trembled. "The blood of the giants lives again," they murmured. "He will awaken what sleeps beneath." But Marith would not let them near. She feared not for herself, but for what her son might remember. For she could feel it, the slow pulse of the old fire within him. It did not burn as destruction, but hummed as remembrance, longing to rise, to fulfill its ancient cycle. She prayed each night by the lake, asking the Creator to bind that light within him forever, to let it shine only as mercy, not as power. But heaven was silent. One dusk, as the sun melted into gold behind the trees, Elior came to her carrying a fragment of black stone. It gleamed faintly as though alive. "I found it beneath the roots by the water," he said. "It called to me." Marith's breath caught. She recognized it instantly, the mark of the seven. One of the stones that sealed the light from the valley of the first fire. "Put it back," she said, trembling. "It belongs to the past. To touch it is to invite what sleeps below." Elior looked at her, sadness softening his glow. "Mother, I hear them in my dreams," he whispered. "They are not angry, they are sorrowful. They say they only want to see the dawn again." "They have seen too many dawns," Marith replied, "and each time they burned the world to see the sun." But when she reached for the stone, it pulsed with warmth. The lake behind them stirred, glowing faintly from beneath its depths. The air grew thick with memory, echoes of voices, faint harmonies from the age before the flood. Elior turned toward the light. "It remembers," he said. Marith grasped his shoulders. "And we must forget, my son. That is how the world survives, by mercy, not memory." Yet even as she spoke, the stars began to move again, forming a pattern unseen since the first age, a circle of fire around a single point of light. The same constellation the watchers once followed when they descended. The heavens were remembering, and in that still, unbearable beauty, Marith understood that her son's birth had not been a second fall. It was a return of choice, the chance for remembrance to redeem itself. That night, as the moon hung heavy and the waters glowed, Elior walked to the lake's edge. He placed the black stone upon the surface, and it did not sink. It floated, shimmering like a single eye of the earth. "Let memory rest," he whispered. The stone cracked softly, and from within it escaped a faint light that rose into the air like breath, neither fiery nor blinding but gentle. It drifted upward, disappearing into the stars. When Marith looked at her son, the glow in his eyes was gone. He smiled as any child might, human, tender, at peace. The earth sighed long and low, as though exhaling centuries of sorrow. The lake fell silent, and for the first time since the watchers fell, heaven did not look away. A pale dawn broke, softer than ever before, light spilling like forgiveness over the water. Marith held her son close, and the stars above seemed to whisper a single word into the wind: balance. The world at last remembered how to breathe. Long after the lake grew silent and the memory of Elior faded into legend, the earth turned once more beneath the weight of new civilizations. The mountains, old and unyielding, rose higher than before, as if trying to hide the wounds of the world beneath their vast, unchanging faces. Men had learned again to build, but what they built now was different. Their towers no longer reached for heaven, they burrowed toward the heart of the earth. For the sons of the seven bloodlines had returned, scattered and disguised, carrying within them the ancient hunger to remember, but this time they sought not the stars above, but the secrets below. They said that the sky had betrayed them once, but the earth still whispered. And so, deep beneath the roots of the mountains, they began to dig. At first, they dug for shelter from storms, from beasts, from wars that never ceased. But as their tunnels grew, so did their wonder. They found veins of glowing stone whispering echoes that sang faintly when touched. They discovered caverns where the air pulsed with unseen light, as if the mountain itself were alive. The oldest among them began to speak of a call. A deep vibration felt more than heard, echoing through rock and bone. They said it was the heart of the world, the breath of creation itself. Others whispered that it was the sleeping pulse of the watchers, sealed within the deep since the flood. No one agreed, but none could turn away. Their hands became instruments of memory. They carved vast chambers into the bones of the mountain's halls that glimmered like stars trapped beneath stone. They built pillars that reached from cavern floor to ceiling, etched with constellations long forgotten. And in the center of each city, they raised an altar not to heaven, but to the earth that remembers. The world above forgot them. Kingdoms rose and fell in sunlight, while the mountain dwellers disappeared into myth. They became known as the underfolk, the children of the deep, the silent builders. They spoke rarely, for the sound of words felt clumsy compared to the hum of stone. Their language became rhythm and vibration, the same frequencies the watchers had once used to shape matter. In their silence they discovered a secret. The mountain was not lifeless. I was aware. When they struck the rock in harmony, it sang back. When they carved its heart gently, it revealed veins of living crystal clear as water, warm as breath. They learned to weave these veins into their dwellings so that their homes glowed softly without flame. Thus were born the cities beneath the mountains: Aramkesh, the Hall of Veins; Naltur, the city of whispering stone; and Seraphaim, the hidden flame. In Aramkesh they carved libraries without books, as spirals of crystal that recorded thought as vibration. To read them, one had only to listen with the soul. In Naltur they forged bridges of light that sang when crossed, each note preserving the memory of those who passed. And in Seraphaim, the deepest of all, they built a throne that no king dared sit upon, for it was said to hum with the pulse of the ancient ones who slept below. Generations passed in peace beneath the mountain. Their world was dark, but not cold, silent, but not empty. They believed themselves free from the errors of their ancestors, safe from heaven's gaze and the temptations of the sky. Yet peace, like memory, does not last forever. One day a miner named Kara struck deeper than any had dared. His hammer rang once, twice. Then the stone beneath him shattered, releasing a sound unlike any heard before. It was not an echo, but a voice. The vibration rippled through the caverns, through every crystal, every wall. The song of the mountain faltered, then changed its rhythm. The light dimmed to a dull red, and the ground trembled as though something vast had stirred in its sleep. Kara dropped his tools and fell to his knees. From the darkness of the fissure below, he heard it again, faint, sorrowful, ancient. "You have found us," it whispered. Panic spread through the tunnels as tremors shook the cities. The elders of Seraphaim gathered at the throne of stone, their faces pale with knowing. For they had heard that voice once before in the songs of the watchers, buried beneath the flood. The mountain was not their refuge. It was their prison, and they had just opened the door. At first the people thought it was only the earth shifting, a tremor, a settling of old stone. But when the lights within the crystals began to flicker, they knew something far older had awakened. The hum of the mountain, once soft and steady, had changed. It now pulsed in irregular rhythms like the beating of a wounded heart. The elders of Seraphaim called it the disturbance, and they sealed the lower tunnels. But whispers ran through the cities like wind through cracks in stone. Something beneath the deep had spoken. Kara, the miner who had struck the forbidden fissure, could not sleep. His dreams were no longer his own. He saw flashes of light under black water, vast forms moving in silence, and faces that were not human but filled with sorrow. When he woke, he heard faint voices following him through the tunnels, not echoing but calling. He went to the elders. "It speaks to me," he said. "Not in words, but in remembering." The eldest among them, a woman named Nara, placed her hand upon his chest. She felt it, the vibration, faint but alive, resonating through his bones. "You have awakened what the world has buried," she whispered. "The memory beneath the flood." Nera ordered that the fissure be sealed, but stone could not silence what had already been called. The mountain's pulse deepened. The crystals that once glowed white now flickered with crimson. The air grew heavy, rich with minerals, yet strangely alive as if breathing. Soon, strange phenomena began to appear in every city. In Aramkesh, the crystal libraries began to hum without touch, their spirals vibrating with lost voices. In Naltur, the singing bridges went silent, and no light returned to their edges. In Rephaim, the throne at the mountain's core began to emit a low, mournful tone that made the walls tremble. The people grew afraid. They said the mountain was remembering, that the old spirits of the earth, once boo. Indeed, beneath the waters were awakening through their song. But Kara was not afraid. He believed the voice had chosen him for a purpose. One night he followed the sound back to the sealed passage. Alone, with only a single shard of light, he unbound the stone that had been placed there. Behind it, a narrow path descended into blackness so complete it felt like drowning in shadow. He descended for what felt like days. The air grew thick, metallic, warm, pulsing as though he were walking through the veins of some sleeping god. And at last, he reached a cavern so vast it seemed endless, lit by a glow that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. In the center stood a single monolith, half buried in stone, a great pillar of obsidian veined with red light. Its surface was smooth, but within it swirled the faint shapes of faces, eyes, wings, remnants of those long buried by the flood. Kara approached, trembling. The voice spoke again, clearer now from within the stone. "You have remembered us, child of dust. We are the fire beneath the world, waiting for the day man would listen once more." He fell to his knees. "Who are you?" "We are what came before," the voice said. "What heaven cast down and the earth embraced. You are our echo, our inheritance flows through you. The mountain is not your prison, it is our womb, and now we are ready to be born again." As the words resonated, the stone beneath him quaked. The light pulsed brighter, spreading through the walls, racing along the crystal veins that fed the entire mountain. The hum grew into a roar. The whole earth seemed to sing. In the cities above, people screamed as the walls vibrated violently. Their glowing homes darkened. The very light that had once sustained them now burned with fury. Kara tried to flee, but his body would not move. The light within the pillar reached for him, curling like smoke, seeping through his skin. It filled his eyes, his lungs, his heart. He felt his body harden, not in pain, but in awe, as though he was turning into the very stone that surrounded him. And then he understood. The mountain was feeding upon him, absorbing his life, his memory, his blood. Above, Nera saw the lights erupt from the cavern's mouth, a crimson glow spreading through every tunnel. She cried out to her people, to the surface, "Go before the earth remembers all." But it was too late. The hum became song again, the old celestial tones the watchers once sang before their fall. It echoed through every wall, every breath, every soul that had ever walked those halls. Some wept at its beauty. Others fell dead at the sound. And as the song faded, silence returned. A silence so deep it felt alive. When the survivors reached the surface days later, they looked back and saw no smoke, no fire, only the still, cold mountain. Its face had changed. New peaks had risen where none were before, as though the earth had grown while it slept. And beneath those peaks, buried in eternal darkness, the cities remained sealed, pulsing faintly with the heartbeat of the forgotten. They would not be found again for many ages. But those who lived long enough to tell the tale said that sometimes, when storms rolled across the mountains, the thunder did not come from the sky. It came from below. When the storms passed and the survivors scattered, the mountain stood quiet once more, monuments of stillness beneath the trembling heavens. The people who escaped the underworld carried with them no treasures, no light, only the haunting echo of that final song. Wherever they went, the ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse faintly, as though the mountain still followed them in silence. They became wanderers, shunned by the world above. They were called the Hallowed, those who had seen the heart of the earth and returned half alive. Their eyes shimmered faintly red in moonlight, and their voices carried strange harmonics, like two tones speaking at once. Some whispered they were no longer human, that the mountain had marked them as its messengers. In time, they settled across distant lands, forming tribes that avoided sunlight, living in the deep forests and high caves. But wherever they settled, the same pattern emerged, stones arranged in spirals, humming softly when the wind passed through. They said the hum was prayer, that it kept the mountain sleeping. Yet sometimes, on nights when the stars hung too low, the hum would answer back. Far away in the western lands beyond the deserts, a boy was born among one of these tribes. His name was Aaron. From the hour of his birth, strange things surrounded him. The earth beneath his cradle would tremble softly when he cried. When he slept, small stones lifted from the ground and hovered in the air around him like tiny moons. His people believed he was the voice the mountain had left behind. As he grew, he began to dream of places he had never seen, vast cities carved of crystal, halls where giants walked, rivers of molten light beneath mountains that breathed. When he awoke, he could still hear their voices. "We are not gone, we are waiting." By his 15th year, the dreams became commands. A soft vibration beneath his skin would guide his steps eastward. He could not resist it. "The deep is calling me," he told his mother. She wept, for she knew all the hallowed carried that call in their blood, and those who answered it never returned. Aaron journeyed alone across valleys and ruins, following the sound that no one else could hear. He crossed rivers that glowed faintly at night, where fish shimmered like shards of glass. He slept beneath skies heavy with stars that seemed to lean closer to the earth, listening. After many months, he reached the base of a mountain unlike any other. Its peaks were dark as obsidian, its slopes veined with faint lines of red light that pulsed like the beat of a heart. When he laid his hands upon its surface, warmth spread through his body. The mountain recognized him. "You've come home," whispered a voice from the stone. Aaron fell to his knees. "Who speaks?" "The memory beneath the world," the voice replied. "The song your fathers heard, the promise your blood remembers." The air thickened, the stone beneath his palms softening like breath. From the crevices oozed a glow that encircled him, weaving around his form like ribbons of living fire. Faces flickered within the light, beautiful, sorrowful, endless. "The Watchers?" he asked, trembling. "Fragments of them," the light answered, "are the remnant of their voice. Long have we slept beneath stone and silence, waiting for one born of both worlds, flesh that remembers, spirit that forgives. What do you want from me? Not worship, not war, remembrance. Sing our song again and we may rest." He did not understand, but the melody rose from his lips before he could stop it. It was the same harmony the mountains had once echoed, the same forbidden resonance that shaped creation in the beginning. The world around him shuddered. Rocks lifted from the slopes, spinning in circles of light. The red veins blazed brighter, winding upward like rivers of molten dawn. And beneath it all, the ground began to move slowly like a vast chest inhaling. The mountain was waking. Aaron cried out, "Stop, you said you wanted peace." But the voice thundered now through every stone, every breath. "To rest, we must rise." Lightning split the sky, the earth cracked. And from within the mountain came a blinding radiance, spilling out through its wounds like blood made of sunlight. For 3 days and nights the storm of light raged. When it ended, the mountain was still again, but its shape had changed. New peaks rose where old ones had fallen, forming a perfect ring. At its center lay a hollow basin, smooth and black as glass. Aaron was gone. The tribes who searched for him found only his footprints, burned into the stone, leading toward the basin's edge. They said he had become the mountain's voice, sealed within its new heart. And when the wind blew through the ringed peaks, they heard him still, a soft, endless chant echoing through the valleys. "Remember, but do not awaken." The hallowed wept, for they understood at last what the deep had wanted. Not freedom, not dominion, but remembrance that could finally sleep. And so they left the mountains, sealing their songs in silence. For the first time since the age of the giants, the world grew still. Yet even in that stillness, the earth kept breathing. And sometimes when the moon was full, the red veins on the mountainsides glowed again, pulsing like memory beneath skin. The cities of stone slept, but they were not dead. They were dreaming. It began as light, not gentle dawn, not sacred fire, but the kind of light that devours shadow, that blinds even the heavens themselves. For centuries, the world had lived in uneasy peace. The mountains slept. The seas whispered. The sky looked on in silence. But deep beneath the calm, the balance had begun to tilt once more. The 7 bloodlines that had long forgotten their kinship had grown into kingdoms, each vast, proud, and desperate to reclaim what they believed was divine. They no longer remembered their shared origin, nor the promise whispered at creation. They remembered only the fire. Each claimed to possess its truest remnant. Each built temples not to worship, but to ascend. And when men tried to build their own heavens, the real heaven began to answer. It started with a single flame that fell from the stars, a trail of white fire cutting across the night, descending over the deserts of Aru's sons. When it struck the ground, the sands turned to glass, and from that glass rose a tower of light, spiraling, humming, alive. They called it the Skysphere. The priests of the sunline gathered around it, trembling. The air near the tower shimmered, and their skin glowed with patterns like burning script. They declared it a sign. The fire of heaven has returned to the worthy. But word of the Skysphere spread, and across the world other kings began to dream of it. They saw visions of power, cities burning gold, oceans parting at their command, the stars themselves kneeling before their crowns. And so began the age of envy, the age of flame. The children of Tammuz, masters of stone, built their engines of war, towers that hurled molten rock into the sky. The descendants of Enzael, the glass prophets, twisted light into weapons, bending the sun into spears that pierced even the clouds. The sea-kin of Dagon summoned storms of blue fire from the deep. And in the northern lands, where the blood of Rephaim still ran humble, the earth itself began to weep. From every corner the sky turned red, not with sunset, but with warning. The air trembled as the first armies marched beneath banners of light. The kings swore that heaven had chosen them alone, that the Skysphere was their inheritance. And when they reached the deserts where the tower stood, they found each other not allies but mirrors, each burning with the same unyielding hunger. No one knows who struck first. Some say a single arrow, tipped with light, crossed the air and vanished into brilliance. Others say the tower itself breathed, that its pulse grew faster, louder, until the air itself caught fire. What followed was no battle. It was an unbound remembrance. The ground split into rivers of flame. The stars flickered. The seas recoiled from the shores. Lightning rained not from clouds, but from the heavens themselves, falling like swords of sound and light. The armies screamed as the air turned to glass around them, freezing time mid-breath. The Skysphere towered above it all, untouched, a living pillar of flame, both beautiful and terrible. From within it came voices, many in one. You have called the fire of heaven, yet your hearts are still of earth. What you sought as glory will return to you as judgment. The kings fell to their knees, blinded, but the fire did not cease. It spread outward, devouring stone, steel, and memory alike. Far away in the mountains that had once slept, the red veins flared again. The cities beneath stirred in their dreaming, and deep in the oceans, the blood of Dagon trembled with recognition. The watcher's memory had awakened, but it was no longer longing, it was reckoning. And as the world burned beneath the crimson heavens, one truth became clear to all who survived that first day. This was not a war of men against men. It was heaven against remembrance, light against its own reflection. The Skysphere had not descended to bless the earth. It had come to cleanse it. For 7 nights the heavens burned without darkness. The fire that descended did not move like flame, but like thought, leaping from mind to mind, city to city, awakening what was buried in every soul that had ever longed for the light. The kings who survived the first storm believed they could command it. They stood before the tower of fire, their faces scorched but unyielding, and called upon their gods to grant them dominion. Yet the sky did not hear prayer that night. It answered only memory. The skysphere began to divide. Its single tower split into 7 great rivers of light, each one flowing toward the corners of the earth, toward the lands of the 7 bloodlines. When it touched the ground, it did not burn, it remembered. The stones themselves began to glow, showing scenes of the first age, the descent of the Watchers, the fall of their children, the flood that tried to cleanse the world. And as the earth remembered, mankind began to forget itself. Those who touched the light were changed. Some saw visions and fell to their knees in awe. Others screamed as the fire entered them, illuminating every hidden thought, every secret desire, until their hearts burst from the weight of truth. Still others were not destroyed but transformed. Their eyes turned white as clouds, and when they spoke, their voices echoed with the sound of thunder and wind. They called these beings the voices of the skysphere. They walked among men as living reminders, not prophets, not angels, but reflections of what humankind had once been and what it could become again. Yet wherever they walked, fear followed. Nations began to hunt them, fearing they were messengers of judgment, and judgment was already coming. From the western sea rose storms of molten rain, red and alive, raining upward and downward at once. The oceans boiled at their touch. The line of Dagon was broken, their coral temples shattered into dust. In the north, where the Israelites had built their towers of crystal, the very light turned against them. Their creations refracted the skysphere into 1,000 deadly beams, and their shining cities became prisons of glass. In the mountains, the descendants of Tammuz fled into their stone halls, praying to the sleeping earth to shield them once more. But the earth had grown weary of remembrance. Its protection was silence. Across the deserts, the sunline of Aru gathered their priests around the original tower. They sang to it, offering their bodies as vessels for its flame, and for a moment it seemed to listen. The fire bent toward them, soft as breath, entering their eyes, their veins, their words. The priests rose, blazing like stars in human form. They shouted, "The fire is ours again. We have become what we were meant to be." But the sky darkened above them. The tower began to collapse, not in ruin but in ascension, folding upward into the clouds. The fire they had claimed rose with it, stripping their borrowed light away. Their bodies turned to dust mid-song, and the desert was left quiet once more. Only one among them remained, a woman named Sar-Radial, whose eyes did not burn. She had not sung with the priests. She had only watched. The fire lingered in her presence but did not consume her. It hovered near her face like a living flame, listening to its reflection. And in that quiet she heard the voice within the light say, "We were never meant to be destroyed, but man keeps building towers toward the sun, and heaven keeps answering with fire." Sar-Radial fell to her knees. "Then stop answering," she whispered. "Let us build nothing. Let the sky forget us." The light dimmed. "Forgetfulness is not peace," it said. "The world must learn to remember without burning." Then it vanished, a final pulse of brilliance that etched her shadow into the sand like a scar of light. When she rose, the tower was gone. Only the silence remained, heavy, holy, infinite. In the following days, the survivors wandered beneath a sky scarred by light. The stars had changed their pattern again, forming a vast circle, the same symbol once carved on the mountains, the mark of the 7. And from within that circle, a faint hum began to grow, not the voice of heaven this time, but of the earth below, rising to meet it. The world had entered a balance of terror, heaven above, earth below, memory awakening between them. The war was not yet over. It was only becoming visible. The war entered the silence between worlds. The sky no longer rained flame, yet its light was strange, flickering, alive, as if the heavens were breathing through the clouds. The earth no longer split, yet the ground hummed faintly beneath bare feet, remembering every step. The air itself held a tension that felt like prayer half-spoken. No one knew if the skyfare had ended or only paused to listen. In the ruins of the old cities, survivors gathered like embers clinging to warmth. They no longer spoke of kingdoms. They spoke of mercy. But mercy was a word few understood. For in the glow of the dying fires, they began to see that the true battle had never been between heaven and man. It was between memory and forgetting. Sar-Radil wandered the desert for 40 days, following the faint hum left by the vanished tower. She ate nothing, drank from dew and starlight. The sky above her was a wound of light, the stars rearranging nightly as though searching for their lost shape. Each night she heard the same whisper, faint but insistent. Balance must be born of both fire and dust. On the 40th night she reached the mountains, those same peaks that had once hidden the sleeping cities of stone. Their slopes still glowed with faint red veins, pulsing like old blood beneath new skin. The hum was louder here, deep and rhythmic, as though the mountain itself were breathing again. Sar-Radil fell to her knees and pressed her ear to the earth. Beneath the surface she heard voices, not screams, not hymns, but murmurs like children learning to speak. They were the remnants of the deep, the forgotten cities calling softly through the rock. "We remember," they whispered. "We dream in silence. We wait for light that heals instead of burns." Tears filled her eyes. "Then let me be that light," she whispered. "Let me burn without destroying." A wind rose, warm and clean, and with it came a single spark from the ground, small, gentle, hovering before her face. It entered her chest like a breath, and her heartbeat changed. She felt both the warmth of the sky and the cool pulse of the earth within her ribs, joined in rhythm. The war had broken her world, but in her, something new had begun to form, the peace between fire and soil. Far away, the other bloodlines felt it. In the frozen north, the last of Inzaal's glass prophets saw their crystal towers dim to gray, the light inside leaving them like exhaled breath. In the west, the sea turned calm, its blue fires sinking quietly into its depths. Even the sleeping mountains ceased their trembling. The world was listening, but not all hearts could bear quiet. Among the survivors of Aru's sunline, there were those who believed Sar-Radil had stolen their destiny, that she had absorbed the Skyfare's favor meant for them. They followed her path into the mountains, led by a general named Kalreth, whose body still bore the scars of the fallen light. His skin was cracked with glowing lines that pulsed with inner flame. He called himself the last flame of heaven. When he found her at the mountain's foot, she was sitting by a pool of clear water, her hands resting on the ground, eyes closed. The air around her shimmered faintly with warmth. Kalreth raised his voice. "You carry what belongs to the sons of the sun. Return it, or I will burn the mountains as our fathers once burned the sea." Sar-Radil opened her eyes. They glowed not with fire, but with calm gold, the color of dawn before it hardens into day. "I carry nothing that can be taken," she said softly. "Fire is no longer a weapon, it has become breathless." But Kalreth heard only defiance. He struck the ground with his blade, and the veins of red stone flared once more. The mountain groaned, remembering. The hum beneath their feet turned to a roar. Sar-Radil stood, her voice steady. "If you call the fire again, it will answer. But this time it will not choose sides." The air split with light. A column of white fire rose between them, stretching from earth to sky. Kalreth cried out as it consumed him, not in flame, but in memory. His life laid bare before him, every choice, every hunger. His sword fell, turned to ash before it touched the ground. When the light faded, nothing remained of him but dust swirling in the warm wind. Sar-Radil lowered her gaze. The mountain fell silent once more, and the red veins faded to gray. She whispered to the still air, "Let this be the last fire." And for a while it was. The years that followed became known as the Age of Quiet Light. The fires ceased, the storms calmed, and the sky no longer bled. The survivors rebuilt not towers but sanctuaries open to the wind and stars. They remembered the Skyfare not as punishment but as cleansing. Yet deep beneath the mountains, where the voices of the old city slept, a faint pulse remained. It beat slowly, patiently, waiting for the next age to forget again. For the war of the Skyfair had ended only in silence, and silence, like fire, always waits to be broken. When the light finally dimmed, when the fire withdrew into memory, the world exhaled. For the first time in countless generations, the heavens were quiet. The rivers found their rhythm again, the winds softened, and the stars shone without trembling. But beneath this peace, the bones of the ancient world still stirred. The titans, the giants born of both light and dust, had not vanished entirely. They were not destroyed by flood or flame, nor by the wrath of heaven. They had fallen into the slow, deep rhythm of the earth, into sleep. Their bodies became the mountains, their breath the mist that clung to the dawn. Forests grew over their ribs, seas filled the hollows of their hands. Yet in the heart of every continent, under stone and silence, their pulse continued, faint, patient, remembering. The old songs say that they sleep facing the heavens. Their eyes, turned upward even in deathless rest, reflect the stars that once called them home. In the quiet that followed the war of the Skyfair, the world began to heal upon their backs. Men tilled fields that had once been the shoulders of gods. They built homes where the ribs of the giants curved beneath the soil. They whispered stories of mountains that sighed in their sleep, of caverns that breathed like lungs. And though most forgot, a few remembered. They were the watchers, last descendants, those who had not sought power or rebellion, but remembrance. They wandered the lands as keepers of the unseen, listening to the ground, reading the pulse of the living stone. They called themselves the wardens of the deep. They carried staffs made from petrified roots and wore amulets of black glass taken from the desert where the Skyfair fell. Their purpose was not to awaken the titans, but to guard their rest, for prophecy said that if they rose again, the world would lose its balance forever. But prophecy also whispered something more. When the stars move once more into the alignment of the first dawn, the titans shall dream again, and through their dreams, the world will remember its origin. And so, the wardens waited. They built sanctuaries upon high plateaus and within hollow mountains, always in places where the hum of the earth was strongest. There they tended to the silence, as one tends to sacred fire, feeding it with prayer, cooling it with mercy. Generations passed. Empires rose and fell like tides above them. Yet still the wardens kept their vigil, listening for any sign that the giant's slumber was ending. Then one night it came. It began with a sound, not thunder, not quake, but a heartbeat. A low, steady pulse that rolled beneath the mountains, awakening old rivers and stirring the birds from their nests. The oldest warden, a man named Thalin, rose from his stone mat and placed his palm against the floor. The vibration moved through his bones like a song half remembered. His eyes filled with light. "It has begun," he whispered. The younger wardens gathered around him. "Is it the end?" one asked. Thalin shook his head. "It is remembrance. The world is dreaming itself again." They stepped outside their sanctuary. The moon hung low, glowing with a hue no mortal had seen, pale gold with a pulse like breath. Across the horizon, mountains that had slept since the beginning began to hum softly. Some said they saw the slopes move, like vast bodies turning in their rest. And then came the wind, warm, alive, carrying whispers. Not of men, but of memory. "We are still here," it murmured through the canyons. "We were never gone." The wardens fell to their knees, tears carving paths through the dust on their faces. For they knew whose voices those were, the voices of the firstborn, the ones who had walked with angels and defied the heavens for love. Yet even as they listened, fear stirred within them. For prophecy spoke of two awakenings, one of memory, one of hunger. And though the mountains dreamed gently now, not all dreams remain kind. The world had entered its quiet twilight, suspended between peace and remembrance. And in the deep places where no light reached, the titans began to stir, not in wrath, but in longing. For even the greatest of them could not sleep forever. The world trembled, softly at first, like a sigh through roots and rivers. It was not destruction, but awakening. The wardens of the deep gathered across the high places, standing barefoot on the living stone, feeling the ancient pulse travel upward through their bones. The mountains did not quake, they breathed. Far below, the caverns glowed faintly. The veins of crystal that wound through the world pulsed like arteries, carrying a light older than memory. It moved slowly, rhythmically, as though the heart of creation itself had begun to beat again. Thalin, oldest among the wardens, led them to the mountain they called Rephaim, said to be the resting place of the first and greatest of the giants. Beneath its shadow, forests grew thick and black, untouched by human hand. No bird sang there. No wind entered its hollows. When they reached its base, they found the ground warm. The air shimmered as if summer lived beneath the soil. Thalin knelt, pressing his palms flat against the earth, whispering the old invocation of balance. "Sleep if you must," he murmured. "Dream if you can, but rise not in hunger." The mountain answered, not in thunder, but in memory. The trees leaned toward the peak as a single tone rippled through the air, low and resonant, older than speech. It was not language, yet every living thing understood it. The wardens bowed their heads. One of them, a woman named Sira, felt the vibration deeper than the rest. Her bloodline traced to Rephaim, the keeper of dust, and she carried within her the rare ability to hear stone as voice. When she closed her eyes, she saw not darkness but shapes moving slowly beneath the surface. Vast forms curled in slumber, faces like carved hills, hands like valleys. "They are not waking," she said softly. "They are remembering." Thalin turned to her. "What do they remember?" She opened her eyes and tears streamed down her face. "The light, the fall, the moment heaven turned away, they still dream of it." A long silence followed. Even the air seemed to listen. "They cannot rest," Thalin whispered. "Their grief anchors the world, and when grief moves, mountains move." Sira nodded. "Then we must go deeper. We must soothe the dream." The others hesitated. To enter the inner caverns was to step beyond life itself. It was said that those who descended past the third chamber of Rephaim never returned in body, only in echo. But Thalin knew the prophecy. He had read it carved in crystal in the ruins of Aramkesh. When the world forgets heaven, the earth will remember it. When heaven forgets the earth, the titans will sing. He placed his hand upon the mountain's face, and a narrow passage opened before them, a tunnel breathing faint warmth, lit by veins of soft red glow. They descended. The air thickened, sweet with mineral and memory. The walls pulsed like flesh, their glow dimming and brightening with the same rhythm as a heartbeat. As they walked, echoes of ancient voices surrounded them, fragments of songs once sung before the flood. Sira stopped. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. They listened. The song was wordless, yet it carried emotion so vast it broke their hearts, longing, sorrow, and something like love. It was not the voice of gods, but of beings who had once walked beside them, who had loved too deeply and were punished for it. Thalin's eyes filled with tears. "They remember us," he said, not with anger, but with mourning. They reached the heart of the mountain, a vast chamber where the air glowed gold. At its center lay a colossal form, half flesh, half stone, its body curled upon itself as if in prayer. The air around it shimmered with faint warmth, and beneath its chest the scent. Edie thrum of a heartbeat shook the walls. Rephaim, the first titan. He was beautiful even in stillness. Moss and crystal crowned his brow, rivers flowed down his arms like tears, and from his closed eyes radiated a faint light as though dreams moved behind them. Sira knelt beside him, pressing her hand to his hand, a mountain-sized palm of living stone. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Rest, old one. Your sorrow has already written itself into the stars." For a moment, nothing changed. And the heartbeat slowed. The walls grew quiet, the red veins dimming into amber. A great exhale rolled through the caverns, warm and soft, carrying with it centuries of burden. The Titan had heard. The Titan was sleeping again. The wardens wept as the mountain settled into stillness. Thalin raised his head, whispering, "Let this be enough, let the others follow." But in the distance, beyond Rephaim, beyond valleys and oceans, other mountains stirred. Not all slumbers were gentle, not all dreams remembered peace. Some titans dreamed of fire, some of the sky, and one, only one, was dreaming of return. The earth's heart slowed, but it did not rest. Something vast had been reminded that it was once alive, and heaven far above felt the tremor of that memory. The next dawn came without color. The light was pale, quiet, suspended between gold and gray. All across the world the mountains stood as if listening not to the sky, but to the pulse beneath them. The earth's heart had slowed, yet every beat carried memory, and every memory had a voice. In the valley below Rephaim, the wardens built fires that did not burn. Their flames were pale blue, made of herbs and crystal dust that shimmered like starlight. The smoke rose in spirals, carrying prayers of gratitude, not for victory, but for mercy. For they had touched the pulse of creation and lived. Sira remained within the mountain, guarding the chamber of the first Titan. She sat beside the vast form, her hand resting upon the cool stone of its palm. She could feel it, the slow breathing of a being that dreamed not of time, but of eternity. Its sleep was not death. It was still a remembrance made still. Yet even in that silence she sensed unrest. Dreams have roots, and the deeper ones are not easily calmed. Sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she saw through Rephaim's own vision, not the mountain, but the memory within it. She saw the first world as it once was, radiant cities built upon seas of glass, the watchers descending like dawn, the giants walking beneath trees that touched the sky. And she felt the sorrow of their fall, a grief so vast it could not die, only sleep. One night, as the moon rose red and low, the mountain spoke again. Its voice was not a sound, but a vibration that lived in her bones. The fire above and the stone below are not enemies, it said. They are the two halves of one memory. When one forgets, the other dreams. Sira bowed her head. Then tell me, Ancient One, what do you dream now? The air shimmered, the chamber glowed faintly gold. We dream of forgiveness, the voice said, but heaven does not dream. Heaven remembers only perfection. That is why we sleep, so the world may have peace until it is ready to remember without fear. Sira's eyes filled with tears. Then I will keep watch. I will remember for the world until it is ready. Above her the earth shivered softly, not in warning, but in assent. The wardens who waited outside saw the mountain exhale a mist that glowed in moonlight, rising like incense to the sky. They knew then that Sira had been accepted as keeper of the sleep, the first in an unbroken line of guardians whose task would be not to wake the Titans, but to listen for their dreams. Centuries passed. Kingdoms rose and fell again. The War of the Skyfair faded into legend, its truths buried beneath new languages, new gods, new fears. The names of the wardens became myth, their temples swallowed by time. But sometimes shepherds wandering near the roots of Rephaim would hear faint harmonies in the wind, low, patient, beautiful, the songs of the sleeping ones. And across the world other mountains began to whisper too. Some sang of peace. Others hummed with darker tones, restive, deep, echoing the old defiance of heaven. In the frozen north, glaciers cracked open to reveal bones the size of towers. Their surfaces gleamed like marble, untouched by decay. In the deserts, dunes shifted to uncover carvings of faces half buried, their eyes turned upward in silent yearning. And in the deep ocean, tremors rippled across the sea floor as if something vast had turned in its rest. The Titans were not waking, not yet, but the balance between sleep and memory was beginning to lean. Far above, the sky began to change once more. New stars appeared where none had been, glowing red like embers breaking through ash. Astronomers, priests, and dreamers alike looked upward, sensing something both beautiful and terrible. For in every age, remembrance returns. It cannot be destroyed. It only waits for silence deep enough to hear it again. In her stone chamber, Sira's spirit lingered long after her mortal years. The mountain had accepted her essence as its own. Her voice joined the pulse of Rephaim, whispering through every root, every cavern, every heart still capable of wonder. Sleep, but do not forget. Dream, but do not rise. For the world is not yet ready for the footsteps of its first children. Outside, the wind carried her words across the plains. where they would become the seeds of another legend, one that said the mountains are alive, that their sighs are songs, and that the end of days will not come from heaven or from fire, but from beneath our feet, when the earth itself remembers that it once had a voice. And somewhere in the cold quiet between worlds, the stars seemed to whisper back, as if heaven too had begun to dream again. When the mountains grew still again, and the memory of the Titans sank into the soft rhythm of the world, a new quiet age began. The earth healed and the heavens withdrew their hand. For the first time in countless generations, the fire of heaven and the pulse of the deep no longer struggled, they simply watched. But memory never dies. It only changes its form. In the lands of the East, where dawn touched the world first each day, the wind carried stories of strange travelers. They came not from kingdoms or tribes, but from silence. Their eyes were pale with distance, and their voices bore the weight of forgotten centuries. They called themselves the Wanderers, keepers of a secret lineage that began when the flood receded and the fire first fell. The people of those lands called them the listeners of the horizon, because they never built, never ruled, never stayed. Wherever they walked, they traced spirals in the dust and murmured to the wind as if it were alive. And the wind, impossibly, answered. They journeyed eastward always, following the rising light. For they believed the sun was not a star but a doorway, a slow-moving gate that opened and closed each day between this world and the one that had been lost. They said they were searching for Ilior's path, the way of the child of light who was born beside the lake, the son of Marith, the bridge between heaven and earth. They believed that if they followed the dawn far enough, they would find where his soul had gone when he vanished beyond death. The world had long forgotten Ilior, but not the Wanderers. To them, he was not a prophet nor a god, but the memory of balance, proof that the divine could live in man without burning him. Their leader was a woman named Nahara. Her hair was white though she was young, and her eyes were the color of river silt, calm and deep. It was said she could see both forward and backward through time, not through magic but through remembrance. For she bore the mark of Emek's bloodline, the keepers of silence between worlds. Each dawn, she stood before her followers as the horizon bled gold and said the same prayer. May we walk lightly through what was once sacred. May our feet remember the earth as it remembers us. May the sun find us worthy of its memory. Under her guidance, they crossed deserts where sand sang beneath their steps. They found ruins half swallowed by time, fragments of the old world, their stones etched with patterns of stars long vanished. The Wanderers called these places the echoes of the first light. In one such ruin, deep in the valley of Harashem, they found carvings older than any tongue, 7 circles intertwined, surrounding a single flame. Nahara touched the symbol and the air trembled. The mark of the 7 bloodlines, she whispered. But the flame is no longer of heaven. It belongs to the earth. That night the sky turned red over the valley, though no fire burned. The Wanderers slept uneasily, dreaming of eyes in the dark and cities beneath the sand. Nahara alone did not sleep. She sat beneath the glowing heavens and listened to the hum beneath the ground, faint, rhythmic, endless. The Titans still dream, she murmured, and we walk upon their eyelids. The next day, as they journeyed onward, one of her companions, a young man named Asher, asked her, "Why do we seek what was lost when the world is finally at peace?" Nahara smiled gently. "Peace built on forgetting is a shadow. We seek not the fire, but the memory of light, the kind that warms without burning. If we do not carry it, the darkness will remember before we do." And so they walked, through forests older than kings, across plains where the air shimmered with unseen song. Wherever they went, storms parted, rivers stilled, and people spoke of dreams, dreams of mountains breathing and stars falling into the sea. The Wanderers knew what it meant. The world was remembering again. The age of quiet was ending, and the light of the East, soft, sacred, awakening, was calling them home. For Bashan, the dawn, past the edges of all maps, something waited, a city not built by hands, a light not born of flame, and a voice that once spoke through both heaven and earth. Come and remember me. They walked for many seasons, following the light that never seemed to stay still. The sky above them changed its color often, sometimes gold, sometimes violet, sometimes so pale that even the sun looked tired. It was as if the heavens were uncertain which dawn to wear. The wanderers of the east crossed lands untouched by kingdoms, places where the air itself seemed ancient, and the stones bore the faces of forgotten beings. They did not move by map or star, but by pulse. Nahara taught them that the path to the lost light could not be charted, only remembered. Each of us, she said one night as they rested near the ruins of a temple swallowed by vines, carries a fragment of the first song. To find the gate of the dawn, we must listen until our breath sings with it. The young ones listened, though they did not always understand. Asher, her closest companion, watched her in silence. In her presence, even the wind seemed hesitant to move. He often wondered whether she truly walked beside them or only between worlds. One night, as the moon hung low and red, Nahara dreamed. In her dream, she stood in a field of glass that stretched beyond sight. Beneath the surface, she could see shapes moving, giant silhouettes, vast and sleeping. Overhead, the stars began to fall one by one until only darkness remained. Then came a voice, soft, like a sigh breaking through centuries. We are not gone. The light you follow is our breath. She woke up gasping, the name Elior upon her lips. At dawn, she led her people toward the rising sun with renewed urgency. He calls from the horizon, she said. The child of light who bridged heaven and earth, he walks before us still. Their journey brought them through the wastes of Oran, a desert that shimmered with ghostly reflections. Sometimes the sand looked like water, sometimes like flames. It was said to be the place where the fire of heaven first kissed the earth, where angels had wept when they fell. As they crossed it, visions came. Each wanderer saw something different. Some saw oceans of light stretching into eternity. Others saw themselves as they were before birth, souls suspended between starlight and soil. But Asher saw something else entirely. He saw the world split in two, one side bathed in dawn, the other swallowed by night. And standing between them was Nahara, her white hair burning like a crown, her face turned toward the east though her shadow stretched into the west. When he told her this, she grew still. The world always mirrors its guide, she said quietly. The light I seek must also be balanced by its shadow. I do not fear it, I only pray it will not be remembered before I do. After many days, they came upon a great plateau where the air shimmered with unseen energy. There were no birds, no trees, only smooth black stone marked with spirals that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The symbols matched those of the 7 bloodlines, but intertwined, unified. The circle of first dawn, Nahara whispered. The place where the watchers first touched the earth. She knelt and placed her palms upon the stone. A soft hum rose from beneath her, the same vibration that Thalen and Sira once felt in the mountains long ago. The ground responded, alive, welcoming. The wanderers watched as Nahara's body glowed faintly, her hair lifting as if in an invisible wind. The stone beneath her rippled like water, and a voice, low, patient, ageless, filled the air. Children of dust and distance, why do you walk still? Nahara answered without fear. We walk because we remember what forgetting costs. We walk because balance must live somewhere, if not in heaven, then here. The voice softened, almost sorrowful. Balance cannot remain where memory burns, but one among you carries both the fire and the peace. The glow around Nahara dimmed and her eyes turned toward Asher. The young man felt a warmth rise in his chest, not pain but recognition. The light that had once lived in the son of Marith, in Elior himself, now stirred within him. He fell to his knees. I am not worthy, he whispered. None of us are, Nahara said gently. That is why the light chose flesh, not stone. The voice faded, leaving only the hum beneath their feet. But now the plateau shimmered with faint, golden mist. Nahara turned to her people and said, The gate of the dawn is near. When we find it, one must pass through, and only one. Asher knew then that his path had been chosen long before his birth. The fire that had slept for ages was stirring again, not to burn the world but to remember it. And as the sun rose, breaking through the horizon like a living heartbeat, the wanderers of the east continued toward its light, carrying not conquest, but the oldest prayer of all, May Mem. Rai and Mercy meet again. The path grew thinner as they neared the edge of the known world, a trail of shimmering dust where the horizon itself seemed to tremble. The sun rose not as it once did. Its light no longer felt distant but alive, as though the sky itself was leaning closer to the earth. The wanderers walked in silence. Each step felt guided by something unseen, an invisible current pulling them toward the dawn. Nahara moved at the front, her pale hair glinting with gold. Asher followed just behind her, the light in his chest pulsing softly, keeping time with the slow heartbeat of the earth. For weeks they climbed a vast incline of white stone that seemed to have no summit. The air thinned, the stars became visible even in daylight, and their shadows grew long and strange, stretching east instead of west. Time itself began to lose meaning. Some said they had crossed into the threshold between worlds. Others whispered that the sun ahead was not the son of men, but the living memory of heaven, the last gate left open after the fall. At the crest of that endless ascent they found it, the gate of the dawn. It was not a structure of gold or fire, but a ring of light suspended in air, vast and silent, its edges made of color too ancient to name. Within it, shadows moved like clouds, forming and dissolving as if the light itself were dreaming. The wind that flowed from it was warm and weightless, carrying scents of rain, dust, and a sweetness like the air before a storm. The wanderers fell to their knees. None dared to speak. Nahara approached the gate and stopped a few paces away. The light touched her face and reflected in her eyes two small suns trembling with reverence. "We have walked far enough," she whispered. "Here even memory must kneel." The air stirred, and a voice like distant thunder rolled from the gate. It was neither male nor female, but something vast, a harmony of all things that had ever lived. "Why have you come, children of dust and dawn?" Nahara bowed her head. "To remember without burning, to find the path that unites the sky that fell and the earth that endured." "And what would you give?" the voice asked. "For remembrance is not a gift, it is a wound reopened." Asher stepped forward. "Myself." Nahara turned sharply. "No, it was not meant for you," he met her gaze calmly. "It was. The light has called me since I first saw the sun. I have carried its warmth and its weight, it reminds me." The light of the gate deepened, swirling with hues of gold and silver. The voice spoke again. "You bear the mark of Elior, the bridge between heaven and earth. His breath lives in your blood, but to cross this gate you must leave remembrance behind. You must become silent." Asher nodded, tears tracing his cheeks. "Then I will become silent." Nahara reached for him, her voice trembling. "If you go, the world will lose the memory of the light again. It will forget its own heart." Asher smiled, the same quiet smile Elior once wore at the lake long ago. "Not if you remain. You are the keeper of the horizon, Nahara. You will remind them." He stepped forward. The light embraced him like a tide. For a moment his form shimmered between flesh and radiance, and all who watched saw visions, mountains turning to temples, rivers rising into the sky, every fragment of the world becoming whole again. Then silence. The gate pulsed once and closed, fading into the air as if it had never been. The land grew still. The wind ceased. Nahara fell to her knees in the empty space where he had stood, pressing her hand to the ground. The earth beneath her was warm. It hummed faintly, a sound like breath, like life continuing. And then she understood. Asher had not vanished. He had become the light of the dawn. Each sunrise from that day forward would carry his memory not as fire, not as judgment, but as mercy made visible. Nahara rose, the wind now stirring her hair. She looked toward the east, where the new sun was rising, softer than before. "He has become the bridge," she whispered. "Heaven breathes through him once more." The wanderers bowed, their shadows stretching long behind them, reaching westward toward the world that would one day need to remember again. And as they descended the shining slope, the first birds began to sing, songs that sounded strangely familiar, as if they had always been part of the light. From that day, the people of the east awoke before dawn, facing the horizon in silence. They did not pray, they remembered. For when the sun rose, they saw not just light, but someone, a presence gentle as breath, watching, waiting, forgiving. The world had not been remade, it had been remembered. And somewhere in the place where heaven and earth touched like two hands through light, Asher, last of the wanderers, still walked. The world had turned over many ages since the gate of the dawn closed. Mountains had forgotten their songs, and the winds no longer carried the old prey. Yet in the stillness of dawn, when light moved through the mist like breath through glass, some said they could still hear faint harmonies, the echo of steps too ancient to belong to men. These were not the footsteps of the Watchers, nor the thunder of the Titans. They were something softer, stranger, the echo of the Nephilim. For though their bodies had turned to dust long ago, their essence had never truly left the earth. The blood of the giants had scattered, diluted, hidden, sleeping, flowing quietly through the veins of humankind. And from that mingled lineage rose 1,000 faces, 1,000 gifts, 1,000 griefs. Some bore the wisdom of the old light, shining quietly through their words and works. Others carried its shadow, an unquenchable hunger for glory, for flame, for the sky that had once fallen to meet them. The world above did not know this truth, but the wardens of the deep did. From their sanctuaries carved in mountain and desert, they watched the slow unfolding of mankind's second forgetting. They saw how the children of the old blood grew restless under heaven's silence, how they dreamed again of building towers, of touching stars, of command and remembrance. And so it began again, not as rebellion, but as inheritance. The Nephilim had once shaped worlds from fire. Now, their descendants shaped empires from iron. In the land between rivers, beneath a sky of constant dawn, rose a kingdom called Nimrael, where men built with impossible precision temples that caught the sun in their courtyards, statues whose eyes aligned with the stars. Their rulers claimed divine wisdom, their prophets spoke with voices that echoed across valleys, and their artisans carved beings with wings of stone. The people said it was genius. The wardens whispered it was memory. For the light that once burned in the veins of the giants was burning again, not in size or strength, but in mind. The echo of the Nephilim no longer roared, I thought. It was a dream. And as it dreamed, the world began to awaken. A child named Sethar was born under the twin stars that marked the constellation of the fallen crown, a sign unseen since the War of the Skyfair. He was small, quiet, and strange, with eyes that mirrored the color of dusk, blue in sunlight, gold in shadow. By his 5th year, he spoke languages no one had taught him. By his 10th, he carved symbols that glowed faintly at night, shapes reminiscent of the first script of the Watchers. And when he turned 15, he began to hear. It came to him in dreams, soft murmurs from beneath the ground, like the hum of sleeping rivers. When he pressed his ear to the soil, he heard the same words over and over again. We remember you. He told the priests of Nimrael, and they grew fearful. Do not listen to the soil, they said. The earth speaks of the old ones, and their voices are forbidden. But Sethar could not stop listening. The hum called to him not as a curse, but as kinship. He felt it move through his blood like warmth after a long cold. One night he wandered to the edge of the city where the foundations touched the desert. The moon hung low, red as rust. There he knelt and pressed his hands into the sand. The ground pulsed beneath his palms, faint, rhythmic, alive. And from the depths came the whisper again, but this time clearer. You are one of us. The bridge breathes in you. Sethar gasped, pulling back, but the light had already touched him. It entered not as fire, but as knowing, sudden, infinite, unbearable. He saw visions of the first world, the descent, the flood, the fall, the long sleep. He saw the Titans beneath the mountains, the wanderers walking east, the gate that once opened to heaven's memory. and when he woke, his hands were glowing. In the morning, the priests found him lying among the sand, his eyes open, unblinking, seeing something far beyond the world. They called it madness, they called it possession, but the wardens, who still watched from afar, knew better. The echo of the Nephilim had awakened in flesh once more, and through the heart of a single boy, the ancient memory of balance had begun to hum again, softly at first, but growing louder with each dawn. For remembrance cannot die. It only waits for someone brave enough to listen. For many nights after his awakening, Sethar did not sleep. When he closed his eyes, he saw too much rivers of molten gold winding through the heavens, beings made of light bowing to shadows, the slow rise and fall of mountains that breathed. The past and present had tangled inside him. The priests of Nimrael feared him. They called him touched by the deep and forbade him from entering the temples. Yet when he walked through the markets, birds stilled their wings. When he spoke, fires flickered brighter. Children followed him in silence, sensing the peace that trailed behind his steps. The elders whispered, "He is one of them," and they were not wrong. The echo of the Nephilim flowed rough his veins, not as power but as resonance. He could feel what others could not, the pulse of buried things, the hum beneath the world's calm surface. Wherever he went, that hum followed, growing stronger, as if the earth itself was trying to speak through him. And so the wardens came. On a night when the stars hung low and the air tasted of rain, a cloaked figure appeared outside Sethar's dwelling. She moved like the wind, soundless, ancient, inevitable. Her name was Enia, keeper of the silent circle, one of the last living wardens of the deep. When Sethar opened his door, she bowed her head. "The earth remembers you," she said, "and so do we." He stared, uncertain. "What am I?" She smiled faintly. "A memory that has taken shape again, a bridge as others before you were. The light and the dust have met in you once more." She drew from her cloak a small shard of crystal, faintly glowing red, a fragment of the old mountain veins that once held the Titan's sleep. "This is the seed of their dreams," she whispered. "It calls to you, does it not?" Sethar nodded. He could feel the hum from it, soft, rhythmic, like his own heartbeat. "Then the time has come," Enia said. "You must follow where it leads." They traveled east together, leaving behind the golden towers of Nimrael. For weeks they crossed barren lands where no wind blew and no stars dared linger. The shard in Enia's hand pulsed brighter the further they went, guiding them through the emptiness. On the 30th night they reached a place where the sand turned to glass. There, in the moon's pale light, a fissure yawned open wide and deep, glowing faintly from below. Enia stopped. "Here," she whispered. "This is where the last song of the giants sank into the earth. The Watchers sealed it after the flood. It has waited for you." Sethar knelt beside the fissure. The hum was louder now, vibrating through his bones. He closed his eyes and pressed his palms to the ground. The light spread outward in gentle waves, illuminating shapes beneath the glass, enormous hands folded as if in prayer. "They are still here," he murmured. Enia nodded. "Asleep yet dreaming, but their dream is changing. They begin to remember themselves. Soon the world will feel their breath again." He turned to her, fear and awe mingling in his voice. "Then why awaken them?" "Because remembrance must find balance," she said. "You are not here to wake them in body, but in spirit, to remind them of what they once sought, peace between heaven and earth. If they rise in anger, the world will burn again, but if they rise in mercy, it will be reborn." Sethar's heart trembled. "And if I fail?" Enia looked toward the horizon. "Then the fire of heaven will return, and this time it will not fall as judgment, but as forgetting." He closed his eyes and began to hum, the same tone he had heard in his dreams since childhood. The sound flowed through the fissure like water, echoing deep into the earth. For a moment the air glowed softly. The ground pulsed once, twice, then silence. The shard in Enia's hand dimmed and cracked. The light vanished. She exhaled, lowering her gaze. "It is done." But Sethar could still feel it, the hum now softer, deeper, woven into the rhythm of the world. Not gone, but soothed. He looked up at the stars, which shone faintly blue again as they had before the war of the Skyphere. "Did they hear me?" he asked. Enia smiled. Yes, and they have chosen to rest a little longer. Together they stood in the silence, surrounded by the vastness of the sleeping earth. Above them, dawn began to rise, slow, golden, endless. The wanderer's prophecy had come to pass. The light of heaven had found its echo in man. And through that echo, the world had remembered once more how to dream without burning. But as the sun climbed higher, Enia's face grew solemn. "Do not mistake rest for peace," she said. "Memory is patient. It always returns in blood, in stone, in song." She placed the broken shard in his hand. "When the earth hums again and you feel it stir, remember this night. Remember that we are its caretakers, not its masters." Sethar nodded. "I will remember." And somewhere deep below, the ancient pulse continued, faint, steady, eternal. The Nephilim slept, but their echo had found its voice again. And through one quiet boy, the earth remembered that it was alive. Seasons turned gently, as though afraid to disturb the silence that Sethar had woven into the world. The boy who had spoken with the earth now lived as a quiet wanderer, far from Nimrael's golden towers. He walked through villages and valleys, never staying long, never claiming to be anything more than a traveler. Yet wherever he went, the land changed. Fields once barren bloomed within days. Wells long dry are filled again with clear water. Even the air around him seemed softer, as if light itself bent to listen when he breathed. But still, deep beneath the calm, the old hum persisted. The wardens heard it in their dreams, a vibration running through every root and mountain vein. The echo of the Nephilim was awake, not in wrath but in remembrance, and remembrance is never still. One dusk, as the horizon burned faint gold, Sethar reached a place where the desert ended and the sea began. The water stretched endless and silent, its surface smooth as a mirror. He stood there for hours, listening. The tide whispered his name. When the first stars appeared, the sea began to glow. Beneath its surface, faint shapes moved, not fish, not shadow, but forms vast and human, their outlines luminous. They did not rise, they swayed like memories caught in the rhythm of waves. Sethar knelt, his hands trembling. "Are you the fallen?" he whispered. A voice rose from the water, soft and many. "We are the echoes of what could not ascend. We are the remembrance of longing." The sea rippled, its glow pulsing like breath. "You are our bridge. The world remembers through you. But it must choose to rest or to rise again." Sethar bowed his head. "If the world rises, it will burn. If it sleeps too long, it will forget," they answered. "And forgetting is the slowest fire of all." He closed his eyes. He could feel the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, the breath of the sea before him, and somewhere above, the cold watching the silence of the heavens. For a moment he understood. He stood at the center of all memory, where everything that had ever been still waited to be remembered. The next morning he returned to the mountains. The wardens met him there, gathering in the hollow beneath Rephaim's shadow. The old keeper Enia was gone. Time had folded her into the silence she had served. In her place stood her granddaughter, Lyriel, whose eyes gleamed like silver dust. She greeted Sethar with reverence. "We have felt your journey. The hum has changed. What did you awaken?" He looked toward the sky where dawn was breaking pale and quiet. "Not awakening," he said softly, "listening. The world wants to remember itself, but it needs a voice that can speak to both light and dust." Lyriel stepped closer. "You mean to become that voice?" He nodded. "The echo of the Nephilim is not meant to command. It is meant to reconcile." That night he stood before the sleeping mountain. The air trembled with that ancient pulse, patient, eternal. Sethar pressed his palms to the earth, and once more the hum rose through him. But this time it was different. It was not calling for remembrance. It was asking permission to rest. He whispered, "Then rest. Let your memory breathe in silence. Let your strength become soil and your sorrow become seed." The ground shuddered, soft as a sigh. From the mountain's base, streams of light flowed outward, not upward, not downward, but into everything. Trees glowed faintly. Rivers shimmered. Even the wind seemed alive again. The hum did not vanish. It became gentler, more human, folded into the rhythm of breath and tide. The last dream of the Nephilim had become the heartbeat of the world. Liriel approached, eyes wide with awe. "What have you done?" "I have returned their voice to where it always belonged," Sethar said. "The world no longer needs giants or angels, it remembers us now." She looked around at the glowing earth. "And heaven, what of them?" Sethar smiled, faint and weary. "Heaven watches, but perhaps for the first time it listens too." As the years passed, stories spread of a man who spoke to stone and sea, whose words made even the stars pause. Some called him prophet, others cursed. But those who met him felt something deeper, peace, older than any god, soft as dust and dawn. When he finally disappeared, no one saw him leave. Some said he returned to the sea. Others swore they saw him walking east at sunrise, his shadow stretching across the earth like the memory of light itself. And sometimes, when the wind moves across the plains or through the hollows of mountains, it hums the old melody, gentle, wordless, alive. The world remembers him not as Sethar, not as Nephilim, not as angel or man, but as the sound the earth makes when it forgives itself. There came a time when even heaven grew quiet. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of watching, of waiting to see what the earth would remember on its own. The angels no longer descended. The mountains no longer hummed. Even the sea, that ancient mirror of creation, stilled as though it too was holding its breath. The fires of the first age were gone. The floods had receded. The towers of men had turned to dust. Only memory remained, woven into wind and water, into soil and bone. The world had become a living archive, whispering to itself in dreams. Above it all, the heavens shimmered pale and distant, veiled in gold. Once that veil had burned with judgment. Now it hung in stillness, like the face of an unseen listener. For heaven had begun to hear what it had long ignored, the song of the earth learning. "NG to forgive." It began as a murmur. At first, only the oldest stars could perceive it, a sound not carried by air or light, but by remembrance. It was the hum of a healed world, the voice of dust remembering its maker. And through that sound, heaven began to feel longing for the first time. From the highest firmament, the messengers of light turned their gaze downward. They saw the earth no longer burning or drowning, but breathing, steady, alive, whole. They saw rivers where fire had once fallen. They saw mountains that had learned to sleep again, and they saw humankind, small and fragile, walking with reverence upon the backs of forgotten gods. Among them, one star flickered brighter than the rest. It had watched since the first descent, when the watchers fell and the light of heaven struck the soil. It had witnessed the fire, the flood, the silence. Now it pulsed as if remembering a name. Asher, it whispered, the name of the last bridge, the wanderer who had become the dawn. The heavens trembled. For in that name was both sorrow and promise, the remembrance of what had been lost and the peace that had been found. Far below, in a valley lit by moonlight, a child stood by a river. The water glowed faintly, catching the reflection of the constellations above. She was small, no more than 7, her hair the color of ash, her eyes pale gold eyes that seemed too ancient for her years. She knelt, placing her hand upon the river's surface. "It's singing," she said softly. Her mother, tending a small fire nearby, smiled. "The river," the child nodded. "No, the sky." And in that moment she was right. For the first time since the War of the Skyphere, the heavens made a sound, faint, melodic, tender. It was not thunder, nor storm, nor flame. It was something like breath, like a sigh after ages of silence. Those who lived in that valley would later say that the stars moved that night, that they turned their faces toward the earth and shimmered like eyes filled with tears. But it was no miracle of light. It was a memory finding its way home. In the days that followed, strange dreams came to the people of the valley. They dreamed of vast halls made of light, of oceans suspended in the air, of beings tall as mountains singing in languages that made their hearts ache. And in every dream there was one constant, a figure of radiance standing between earth and sky, whispering, "Remember me not as fire, but as peace." The elders called it the return of harmony. The wardens, now old and few, called it the silence of the heavens, for the divine no longer commanded. It listened. And in that listening the world learned a truth older than time, that heaven had never been above or beyond, but within the breath of every living thing. The stars were not watching from afar. They were watching through us. The child by the river looked up once more at the night sky, her eyes glowing faintly as if the light inside her remembered every age that came before. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. And somewhere far beyond sight, the heavens answered in silence, a silence so complete, so gentle that even eternity paused to listen. The stillness lingered. It was not emptiness nor indifference, but a quiet too vast for words, the kind that holds everything at once: sorrow, joy, creation, and rest. Heaven was no longer the throne above the world. It had become the space between every heartbeat. Generations passed beneath this silence. Empires rose like dust and dissolved the same way. The old temples of Nimr'el crumbled, their stones reclaimed by ivy and time. The watchers' names were gone from memory, their legends softened into lullabies. Even the wardens, once keepers of the deep, became myths whispered by shepherds to calm their flocks under the moon. Yet in this forgetting, something holy endured. The quiet had become language. The world did not need voices anymore. It was the voice. Children born in those centuries began to dream differently. They did not see towers or floods or angels. They dreamed of wind carrying songs too soft to name, of rivers that remembered faces, of mountains breathing slow and gentle. The dream spread like pollen, unseen but alive. And far above, the heavens began to change. The stars, which had once blazed with division, some born of rebellion, some of obedience, now pulsed together in rhythm. It was as if the universe itself had remembered its first harmony. Constellations that men had named for gods and monsters aligned into spirals, forming a pattern no eye had seen since before the flood. The silence was singing. In one forgotten valley, the same where the child had once heard the river hum, the people began to gather. They came from distant lands without knowing why. Farmers, wanderers, scholars, beggars. Something in the air called them. The light seemed softer there, the wind warmer, the stars closer. Among them was an old woman with silver hair braided down her back. She was the last descendant of the wanderers of the East, carrying with her a faded piece of parchment said to bear Nahara's final words. "The dawn never ends. It only moves from sky to soul." Each night she sat by the river, whispering to it as if to an old friend. And sometimes when the moon touched the water, the ripples shimmered with faint light, not reflection but memory. The villagers began to notice. They called the woman the listener of the sky. When they asked what she heard, she smiled. "The heavens are learning our silence," she would say. "They have begun to remember through us." One night a storm gathered without thunder. The clouds were pale, luminous, turning the whole valley into a chamber of soft light. The old woman felt her bones hum with that familiar rhythm, the hum of the deep, the sound that had once carried through titans, mountains, and stars. She looked up. The sky was no longer distant. It was near, almost breathing. From that luminous veil came no voice, no fire, no command, only a whisper woven from stillness itself. "The circle is whole." Her tears fell freely, not from sorrow, but from release. It was the final note of a song that had begun before time, the return of unity, the merging of all things once divided. She stood, weak but radiant, and placed her hand upon the river. In that moment the heavens mirrored her gesture. Clouds curved into a great spiral above, glowing with gentle gold. Every drop of water, every leaf, every stone vibrated with the same pulse. The boundary between above and below vanished. Those who witnessed it said the stars themselves descended that night not as fire but as rain, falling softly into the water, into the soil, into the hearts of men. And when morning came, the storm was gone. The valley was silent again, though not empty. The air shimmered faintly, as if light had become part of breath itself. The old woman was gone. But where she had stood, a single tree now grew, its leaves silver, its roots touching both the river and sky. The villagers called it the Tree of Quiet Light. Under its branches, no one lied, no one shouted, no one hungered. The air itself carried peace. Across the world, others began to feel it, that same stillness rising through them like dawn. Fishermen paused in their boats and wept without knowing why. Children laughed and said the clouds looked like angels sleeping. And the wardens, what few remained, laid down their staff, smiling. Their task was complete, for heaven had not descended, earth had not ascended. They had simply met in silence, a silence filled with all that had ever been said and all that would ever need to be remembered. The stars glowed one final time in perfect harmony, then softened, returning to their patient watch. The heavens no longer ruled, they listened. And through that listening, creation rested. Morning came as if for the first time. The light that touched the world was neither cold nor bright. It was warm, weightless, tender. It did not pour from the sky, but rose gently from the ground, as though the earth itself had learned to glow. And for a moment every living thing paused. The wind did not move. The rivers held their breath. Even the smallest grain of sand seemed aware of something vast, the quiet presence of a peace too deep to speak. For the first time since creation's beginning, heaven and earth shared the same silence. In that stillness, the dreams of every age converged. The watcher's sorrow, the titan's sleep, the wanderer's long road, the giant's grief, the light of Asher, the prayers of Nahara, the hum of Sethar, all the fragments of remembrance found their rest. The story of separation had ended, not in fire, not in judgment, but in return. The old sky no longer loomed above. It breathed beside the world now, soft as breath against the skin. The stars were not watchers, they were memories, sparks of what once had been, resting at last in peace. Somewhere near the silver tree by the river, a child awoke, the same child who once said the sky was singing. She sat up, eyes wide, and listened. There was no voice, only the quiet rhythm of her own heartbeat. Yet within that rhythm she heard everything: the laughter of rivers, the sigh of mountains, the distant pulse of sleeping giants, their dreams now gentle. The warmth of a light that had never been lost, only waiting. She stood and stepped toward the tree. Its leaves shimmered like soft glass, catching sunlight that seemed to move slower here, more thoughtful. She touched the bark and felt the faint hum of life within, steady, patient, alive. And from somewhere deep within her, a whisper rose, not from memory, not from teaching, but from knowing. The heavens are no longer above us. They are within us. The words were not hers alone. They belonged to the world, to every creature, every stone, every breath that had ever risen into prayer. The sound of them carried outward, through the air, across mountains, through cities and ruins, over seas that had forgotten how to rage. Those who heard it did not understand at first, but they felt it, a loosening in the heart, an uncoiling of centuries of fear. They felt themselves lighter, as though the gravity of grief had finally let go. In that awakening, the world did not change. It remembered what it had always been. The priests of Nimrael, now scattered remnants of an ancient order, felt it as warmth spreading through their temples' stones. The farmers of the western plains felt it in their soil, as crops bloomed before harvest. The few surviving wardens, deep within their hidden sanctuaries, felt it in the walls, the mountains humming again, but softly this time, like a lullaby rather than a warning. And across the sky, a faint light appeared, not a tower, not a star, but a ring of soft gold, vast and slow-moving. It glided from east to west, dissolving as it went, leaving behind not flame but stillness. They called it the last dawn. That night the world slept without dreams, and for the first time since the first descent, heaven slept too. It was said that somewhere beyond the veil of the stars, the divine flame dimmed to a gentle glow, content at last to rest within its creation. No longer a ruler, no longer apart, only presence, only peace. And in that shared rest, something eternal began, a silence so complete that it became a song again. A song that was not sung, but felt. It carried no words, only memory. Of light that had once fallen, of earth that had once cried out, of waters that had once buried and cleansed, of beings who had loved too much and paid with exile. and of a world that had finally forgiven itself. In the centuries that followed, no prophet rose, no tower was built, no scripture was written. There was no need, for all things spoke the same truth. That creation was not something to reach toward, it was something to remember. And those who listened closely in the hush before dawn or the calm between storms would hear it still, the soft hum that once belonged to the giants, the same tone that once called the angels to their fall. But now it was no longer the sound of defiance. It was the sound of harmony. The child by the silver tree grew old beneath its branches. When she died, the wind did not mourn. It carried her voice upward, folding it into the same endless quiet that now filled the heavens. And so the circle closed. The first light had fallen to earth. The last light had risen through man. And in their meeting, both heaven and earth found the same ending, the silence that holds everything, the peace that needs no name. The heavens were silent. The earth was still. And all that was left to say had already been said in the beginning. There is a silence that comes only at the end of stories, a silence not born of emptiness but of completion. The kind that feels like the pause after a final heartbeat, when even the stars lean closer to listen. It is said that when the heavens fell quiet, a great breath passed through creation, so faint it could not be heard, so vast it could not be measured. It flowed through every living thing, reminding all that they were made of the same light, the same dust, the same remembering. The mountains breathed it in first. Their roots stirred deep beneath the soil, not in hunger or fear, but in gratitude. They had carried the sorrow of gods for too long. Now they carried peace. The seas followed, their waves rising in slow rhythm, not to devour, not to erase, but to cradle the light that had returned to them. For the sea had always been memory's first mirror. In its depths, the old fire and the new dawn met and embraced. The wind moved next. It wound through valleys and across deserts, through forests and temples long abandoned. It did not speak in words, for there were no words left that could contain such truth. It only touched faces, human, animal, stone, leaf, and whispered, "You were never forgotten." And in that whisper the earth remembered itself. The people of the last age did not call it revelation. They called it the quiet return. No angels appeared, no trumpets sounded. There was no kingdom descending from the clouds, only stillness, only breath. And through that breath everything living found its rhythm again. Old stories became seeds. Songs that once mourned turned into lullabies. The names of the giants faded into myth, their memories softened into the soil, their dreams rising through the roots of trees. And though none could see them, the watchers were still there, not as flame or shadow, but as light caught in water, as the hush between thunder and rain. Their exile had ended the moment the world forgave them. For forgiveness, too, is a kind of homecoming. Far to the east, where dawn first touched the world, the silver tree still stood. Its leaves shimmered in eternal twilight, turning sunlight into song. Travelers came from distant lands to rest beneath its shade. Hay spoke no prayers, they simply listened. And when the wind moved through its branches, they heard it, the hum that began when creation was young, the same tone that echoed in every heart that had ever dared to remember. It was not the voice of gods or men. It was the voice between them, the voice that had always been there, waiting for silence deep enough to be heard. Some said the sound was the breath of the child by the river, still moving through the world. Others said it was the last dream of the Titans, carried upward through stone and sky. But the oldest among them, those who had listened longest, knew what it truly was, the sound of heaven and earth exhaling together. And so life continued, not as glory, not as punishment, but as balance. Children were born who never knew the word fall. They grew beneath skies that no longer judged them, walked on soil that no longer ached beneath their weight. Their hands built, but not out of pride. Their songs rose, but not out of fear. And when they looked at the stars, they did not wonder who lived there. They remembered that they were looking into themselves. The watcher's tale became a whisper, then a dream, then a pulse too gentle to name. But still, beneath every wave and every spark and every heartbeat, their story lived. The first light that fell had returned to the dust. The dust had become breath, and the breath had become prayer not spoken but lived. And somewhere beyond all horizons, where memory and mercy finally meet, a voice, perhaps God's, perhaps the world's own, spoke the last line of all creation. Be still and know. Then came the final silence, the kind that does not end because it no longer needs to. The stars dimmed to their places, the seas rested, the winds slept, the mountains dreamed, and the earth, cradled once more in its Creator's calm, breathed the slow, infinite breath of peace. No trumpets, no fire, no flood. Only stillness, only remembering, only love returning to where it began. And thus ended the story of the birthplaces of giants, a world that learned to speak again only through silence, a creation that found its heaven not above but within. The song was finished, but its echo, the hum that once shaped mountains, that once moved angels to tears, still lingers in every dawn. If you listen closely, you will hear it too. It is the sound of all things breathing together, the last word of the divine, the first word of peace, the breath that remains.